Johnversations podcast. This is episode 6. So I just wanted to take a minute and say thank you to my very special guest, Miss Emily Parsley. Thank you so much for coming in today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
No, it's absolutely my pleasure. We kind of talked about this the last time that we were hanging out, but you are one of those friends that I have that, like, we can just sit and talk, you know what I mean? And the conversation kind of carries it through. And I feel very lucky to have that with you because there aren't a lot of relationships that you make, at least in my experience.
True, yeah.
Yeah, there's not a lot of relationships where you can just kind of let the conversation hold a weight and you don't need something to kind of fill it in or move whatever you're doing forward. So very, 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 very happy to have you here. You are a yoga instructor now.
Yes.
But not like what we started off as, right? It seems like that's kind of something that you found.
Oh, yeah.
So I wanted to, for people who may not know you, we've got friends and family and stuff like that listen, but I'm hoping, from talking to you and what I know about you, there have been some things that have happened in your life that I was telling you before, I think could really inspire people. And so for the people that don't know you, or the people that may be watching this that aren't like, oh, that's my kid, or you know what I mean, just excited to see you. Talk to me a little bit about where you're from. Where'd you grow up?
Yeah, so I grew up in a really small town in Woodbury. So I currently live in Murfreesboro. It's, depending on where you're at, 20, 30 minutes away in this really small town. That's where my entire family grew up. So yeah, I grew up in Woodbury out in the sticks.
Okay.
But I moved to Murfreesboro, I guess, after I graduated high school, and I've been there ever since.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, I've always known you, because, I've known you since before Kara and I got married. So, I want to say it's probably been about 4 or 5 years. But since I've known you, you've always been kind of like that really open-minded, like, hey, just go with the flow kind of person. That's something I really enjoy about you. But was that what you were like as a kid? Or, were you... Talk to me a little bit about little Emily. Because I know adult Emily, but I kind of like to imagine what you were like as a kid.
So I like to think that I've sort of always been this way. I can remember, I'm very, very curious. I've always been that way. I like adventure. I always want to know things, to get to know people, and just learn constantly. I've always been super into learning and kind of having new experiences. But I think a lot of that probably has to do with my parents. So my mom is also super open-minded and always encouraged me to really kind of think for myself. And yeah, my dad was sort of the same way too. So I think I always kind of have been a little more open-minded, and I love people. So I've always just been really curious about people and getting to know other people's experiences and really understanding them. And so, yeah, I think I've always been pretty open-minded, pretty curious, interested in life and other people.
Well, let me ask you this. Like, what do you think, because there are, there are certain people that are like that, right? That are really interested in, like, the human experience and, like, why the brain may work the way that it does and things like that. And then there are people that are just kind of the opposite side of that. What do you think it is about that like fascinates you so much, or what do you think it is that kind of draws you to wanting to know kind of, how a person thinks, or I hope you understand what I'm saying, but kind of like,
totally. Okay.
Yeah.
So first of all, I like to credit a lot of that to being an introvert. So once I kind of get connected to people, I open up a lot. But initially, like, I'm an introvert. I have a really kind of rich inner life. And I think when you spend a lot of time, I was also an only child for 10, almost 11 years. And so even as a kid, like, I was by myself a lot. I learned to play, and I had this really vivid imagination. And I think that, like, spending a lot of time sort of on my own, I got super... And I'm a super sensitive person, and very intuitive, and kind of that's just my nature. And so I think kind of spending those times alone, getting to, like, explore on my own, and I'm, pretty in tune with my feelings and things like that. And I think, like, when you really sort of get to know yourself kind of young like that, or you can kind of be in tune with yourself, my question was always like, oh, like, well, what do other people think, or how do other people experience this, or how does this make other people feel? And so being able to, like, be curious about that. And then I was lucky enough to when it comes to friendships, I really like a more intimate friendship. I don't have a really big circle of friends. I have a few people that I'm really close with, and I like those really like deep, intimate like connections with people. And so I think I had that as a kid. I was pretty lucky. I had, 3 or 4 girlfriends for years growing up that we were just kind of in this little group together. And then
together.
Yeah, and so really learning how to make those kind of deep connections with people from the beginning, I think really drives my need to continue to do that and to get to know people. My mom was also very emotional. I come from a family of Pisces women. So me, my mom, and my grandmother are all sort of in that same vein of being that sort of creative and like deeply feeling sort of people. And so it's partly in my nature, and I think I was just around that a lot. So I was encouraged to talk about my feelings and that kind of stuff. So I think it's easier for me to connect to someone on a more intimate level than it is on this sort of surface, like I'm terrible at small talk, which is why I was kind of excited to come on the podcast, because I was like, we can kind of dig into things a little bit more. This is a kind of conversation I really enjoy. So
me too. And I'll be honest, I mean, conversations like these are really the reason that I wanted to do the podcast from the start, is just because, like I said, there are a few people that I have those kind of relationships with, and I mean, hopefully it'll grow and I'll get to meet new people and things like that. But this, I think, kind of boils it down to how can you dig that extra mile down and kind of work things out. So I'm very, very happy that you feel like that and that you were looking forward to this. I was going to ask you, but it sounds like you had already answered. It sounds like, because I know you had mentioned like both your mom and your dad were pretty, open about expressing feelings and things like that, but it sounds like you may get more of your nature maybe like from your mom's side.
Yeah, definitely. So I think realistically, my dad and I have never had those sort of really deep, intimate conversations about feelings. So my dad, I think, is a very sensitive person, but I think he's not, he doesn't open up and share that a lot of times, but I would get those glimpses growing up and like knowing that my dad was like really soft on the inside, like had this big tender heart, and he was always very tender with me, and we had a lot of fun together, and he was always just very loving. But I think I definitely learned how to get more in touch with my feelings thanks to my mom, and we did have those like really long heart-to-heart conversations. And especially around 10, 11 years old, like that's a really tough age, right? And especially for girls, and I think that girls can get really vicious around that time. And so like being really close to my mom and having that sort of guidance on like, here's how to maintain these friendships and here's what's okay and what's not okay, and just really being able to like come home and cry when I need to, or whatever
not
it was.
The judgment or...
But at the same time, my mom is kind of a badass. Like she was a single mom for quite a while, and there's been a lot of things happen in our family. So we've all had like our own journeys to walk and lots of things to overcome. And so I really have a lot of strong women in my life too. And so to be able to have that strength and the vulnerability, I think is so important.
Yeah, I definitely agree, because, my mom is, my parents got divorced when I was like 14 or 15. But she's a single mom. And, there's 4 of us, 3 of us are a year apart. And then my youngest sister and I are 7 years apart. Yeah. So, it's kind of interesting because, with her, you're kind of talking about like being able to like be, it was interesting for her because, or with my relationship, or looking back at it now, because she was very, very good at saying like, okay, it's okay to be emotional, but at the same time, she was kind of playing both roles. So it's like, it's okay to express your feelings.
Absolutely.
But also, all right, you've expressed them, kind of, what are you going to do? Suck it up. What's your next move, right? Like,
absolutely.
you feel like this, so what are you going to do? And I think that's kind of, as a parent, I think that's like a really fine line to kind of walk. It's a
delicate balance.
And she's kind of the same way too, where when you were talking about your dad kind of, having a lot of feelings, I don't remember, other than like myself and my siblings kind of just like irritating her or like pushing her to the limit. I don't remember her crying too much like over her own stuff.
Right.
Or, it was always, my brother and I fighting, and we end up through the back door on the deck. And then she's just like, I can't take it anymore.
Yeah.
But I don't ever remember her like getting upset about things that were like affecting her outside of us. And I think that's kind of it's got to be a brave place to come from, thinking about your dad to kind of like, because I think as men too, a lot of it is that we're kind of like, well, you feel all these things, but you ignore them, you push them down.
Yeah.
Like you go out into your workshop, build a birdhouse, curse a little bit, and then come back in.
Yeah.
So I mean, I think it's when somebody can do both of those things, I think it's like it's a fine line to walk. So I wanted to ask you this. So you said you were kind of adventurous, things like that. Like around that age, like what were the adventures that, because, like I said, I'm the oldest of 4. Mm-hmm. So I have a real interest in kind of being what the other side of that coin is. Because being young, around that age, you always had somebody to run around with.
Yeah.
What was it like kind of doing those or finding those adventurous things, like, being an only child?
Yeah. So, I was an only child for 10 years. And then during that time, I lived out in the country. And so I was outside all the time. I played sports as well at that age. And so I really enjoyed that. But most of the time, if I was at home, the adventures were outside. I lived on a farm, and for a big chunk of my childhood, I grew up with my great-granddad right down the driveway from us. So his house and our house was kind of like, we shared the same driveway. Okay. And so he was really close by, and so a lot of times I was at the barn with him and taking care of the horses, and we had cows, and we had chickens, and we had like the whole acres. The whole thing, right? So it was that, but I did a lot of exploring, and it was really funny listening to Bob's episode talking about like exploring in the woods mm-hmm. and things like that, because that's kind of how I grew up too. And then when I would go to my grandmother's, I used to spend the weekends with my grandmother a lot, my mom's mom, and her husband had a son who was my age, and so we had 4-wheelers, and so there was like, we had acres and acres to explore on these 4-wheelers and like get out and build teepees and like do all of this cool stuff. So a lot of it was like being outside. How old were you
when you're ripping it up on 4-wheelers?
Oh my gosh. It was before my brother was born. So I was probably 8-9 years old. Okay. Yeah.
So like just by yourself?
Yeah. Did the two of us. Yeah.
Yeah.
We had rules, but it was back in the day. We were out in the country. There was no helmets. It was just kind of like, hang on.
Well, I know Kara has a story where they were riding them. I think she was probably around that age, maybe a little bit older, and she ended up flipping it with just her on it.
Yeah, been there.
We're kind of mentioning Bob's episode. It was we were kind of talking about like how that just would not, like, I can't imagine right now with my daughter
not fly.
Being 50. I can't imagine her being 8 years old and me being like, go for it, honey, you got this.
Yeah, take off.
I told Kara, I'm just excited for her to get old enough to mow the lawn. Yeah. Because then I don't have to do it anymore. I'm like, there's your adventure. Like, get out there, rake, get all the sticks up. So I know you said you were an only child for a while. Mm-hmm. How you said you were like 8 or 9 when your brother was born, or was it?
I was 10, and so my brother was born in December. My birthday's in March, so I was 10, and then I turned 11 just a couple of months after he was born. But I was so excited. Like, I remember, so we have different dads, so he's my half brother, but I just don't think half siblings are not really a thing to me. I'm like, no, he's my brother. Right. But my dad used to have me kind of tease my mom, because my parents had a pretty good relationship growing up. They were excellent co-parents and never said anything negative about the other one in front of me, even if they weren't getting along. Like, I never knew that. And so my dad would have me poke fun at my mom all the time, and around Christmas time a lot, they would, of course, like, what do you want for Christmas? Make your Christmas list. And I would always, my dad's like, tell her you want a little brother for Christmas. And I did. Like, I really wanted a little brother, and this is like my favorite story to tell about him is that I used to ask for a little brother for Christmas, and my mom was always like, oh, okay, like she thought she was done. And then when I was 10 years old, earlier that year, I found out my mom was going to have a baby, and my little brother was born 2 days before Christmas, and he came home from the hospital on Christmas Day, and I quite literally got a little brother for Christmas, and I was like, this is the best gift ever. So I was super excited.
That's awesome. Well, let me ask you this, because I can imagine being at that age, right, being an only child, and then finding out that you're going to have a little brother, like, or, little sibling, because I'm sure you weren't sure at first anyway, but I can imagine the excitement once he gets there. Again, being the oldest of 4, I can imagine that, because I'm the kind of guy that, like making jokes, I would get him like a half a present. And be
Yeah.
like, here you go. Like, half brother, half a present. It saves 50% off.
Yeah.
No, but I mean, how was your relationship with him? I mean, were you guys, I mean, obviously brothers and sisters fight and things like that, but did you have much of that because that age gap is so
really
big?
So when my mom told me, she sat me down, I remember this one morning before school, and she told me, and I remember I just cried. Like, I was so excited about it. So from the very beginning, I was super excited to get a sibling. And I think when he was born, I like wanted to do everything. Like, I wanted to like feed him and change his diaper and like put him to sleep. And they let me do some of that, so I really felt like I got to bond with him when he was, just a baby. And then I think, I started to get into that like preteen phase where I'm just like, I don't want to be, I was a pretty angsty, like preteen and teen, right? And so like everyone and everything was just annoying. And I loved him so much, but I wanted to be in my room and I wanted to listen to my music and I like didn't want people to bother me, right? And so I would shut my bedroom door and then my brother would come and he would just be like kicking or knocking on my door and I'm like, oh my gosh, like leave me alone. And he would just cry because he loved me so much and he just wanted to like be in there hanging out with me. But I was like, don't touch my stuff. And, so we kind of had that. But we never really have fought very much. I think the age difference, we have a very interesting bond. I think we don't have that typical sort of sibling bond because of that. And, we didn't live together for a chunk of our life, which I'm sure we'll kind of get into some of that story later. But, so we have a very interesting dynamic now where I'm kind of like the cool older sister and I get to like take him to do like cool stuff and he can like come stay at my house for the weekend if he wants to, which a lot of siblings maybe don't have because they kind of grow up closer together, So I think it's a really special sort of thing to kind of get to observe your sibling growing up and to really be in a place where you can appreciate like the different stages they're going through because you're just a little bit further ahead. So I think sometimes I wish there wasn't such an age gap, but also I wouldn't trade it because I think it's a really cool experience.
Well, I think too, like, so again, being the oldest of four, with there being a year apart between three of us, it's not like any one of us could be like, listen, man, like I've gone through what you've gone through because we're all pretty much going through.
You're in that same stage. Yeah,
you're going through like. So I can imagine it would be really cool to kind of have that perspective. And I feel like I have that a little bit with my youngest sister because she's the one that her and I are 7 years apart.
Yeah.
And I remember, when I was in high school, she was like, "What? Oh, you like Blink-182? Oh, I love Blink-182.
Yeah.
Or, you like, ooh, burn me this CD. Like, I really like, what were we listening to in your car? Stuff like that.
Yeah.
And I think that is a part of the relationship with her that I don't have with the others because we were so close. So this is a story that I don't like to tell a lot because it's embarrassing. So why not?
I love a good embarrassing story.
So my sister had Spanish homework she had to do. She had to make like homemade taquitos.
Oh,
and she came home. She made them just enough for everybody in her class. And I think I was in my senior. I must have been in my senior year, and she was a junior maybe, or maybe I was a junior. She was a sophomore. I've tried to block this out, but it always gets brought up by my family. So I was out after school. I grew up playing in bands, so in high school, as soon as I got out of school, like I didn't do homework. I was like, it's time to go, just practice. So I come home. It's probably 9:15, 9:30, and I see these taquitos in the refrigerator. I'm like, oh my God, yes. This is awesome. So I opened my mom's bedroom door. I was like, hey, are those taquitos in there for anybody? And she didn't say anything. So I was like, I'm going to smash.
Yeah.
So I ate like 4 or 5 of them, and I was a fat kid. Like, I'm definitely not like a slender man now, but I was a fat
Well,
kid.
at that age, it's like you literally just want to eat everything in sight.
Yeah, but also like I was a slob. Like 110%. Like I look back at pictures and I'm like, oh man. But so I smashed. And so I go to bed, get up in the morning, I'm in the shower, and the bathroom door just kicks in. It's my sister. She's like, did you eat my Spanish homework? And I was so embarrassed. I said, "Oh, sure, blame the fat kid." And she felt bad for a second.
Oh, man.
And then I think in her head, she was like, "Yeah, I am blaming the fat kid. You ate all the taquitos." So
like, it had to be you.
Yeah, and it was me.
Right.
And it was definitely the fat kid. But it was just that I like felt so much shame in that moment that I couldn't just own up to it. So I imagine there's probably not a lot of moments like that.
Right.
You know what I mean? Being so close or being so far apart. So, you know, I know he gets to like come stay at your, like, you know, you're like, "Hey, come stay with me for the weekend." Let me ask you, like, now, like, how does that? Because I know that Kara has a brother that the age difference is pretty similar to that.
Yeah.
And I love it. I love when we're like, "Hey, man, like, come over. Like, we'll watch a scary movie and like we'll take you out and get like." Last time he was here, we took him to Five Guys, and then we took him to get ice cream, came back, like, watched the movie and stuff. And you could tell he was like, "All right, I'm really enjoying it." So, like, how does that make you feel? Because I know for me, it's like, I feel like I'm kind of, in a weird way, kind of showing them, like, a different world or, like, a different lifestyle than what they're used to.
Yeah, so I think that our personalities are pretty similar. I think me at his age, we probably are very similar. But I really enjoy it because I think we have just grown up pretty differently. And, you know, obviously we have different dads. And so he lives with his dad, who I love and who still, you know, treats me like his own daughter. And I go and see him on holidays. And, you know, like we do the whole family thing with everybody. But I think it's really interesting because I think that I am different from his dad's side of the family. Like my mom's side of the family and his dad's side of the family are they're pretty different, right? They grew up pretty differently. And so I enjoy like him getting to come and hang out with me, and like he and Bob get along really well, you know? And he has much more experience like with the teenage boy thing, because obviously I was never a teenage boy. But we get to do cool stuff. Like we go longboarding at the Greenway, and we like, you know, we do fun stuff that like maybe some of his friends aren't even into. So I think I sort of get to like fill that role, a little bit of like being a friend, but being a little older and kind of being able to like do different stuff with him that he can't do when he's just like hanging out with his friends. So I really enjoy it. I think that he just started driving. He got his driver's license. Congratulations.
Congrats.
Yeah.
And be very safe.
Yes. So he got his driver's license, and I'm hoping that, you know, once he gets to get out on his own a little bit and stuff, that we'll get to like hang out a little bit more. Yeah. So I'm looking forward to it.
I can see like him having, I just pictured in my head where like he's having some kind of existential meltdowns. He's like, "I just got to go to Emily's." Yeah.
I think that I'll end up being, I kind of hope even, a refuge, because I think that he has a brother as well. So I grew up, and I've always said that I have two brothers, because again, I just feel like the stepbrother or the half brother, like it makes absolutely no difference to me. Like my brothers are my brother, you know?
Like the relationship that you choose to have.
Yeah, so he has an older brother who's a couple years older than him. And I was really excited when our parents got together because I sort of got this like bonus brother. Yeah. And so they have a really interesting relationship, and I don't get to see him quite as much. I do see him like at family functions and things like that. But yeah, they have an interesting dynamic, and then he and I have an interesting dynamic. So he's kind of got these options when it comes to like siblings and like how they're going to hang out and, you know, that kind of stuff.
What's the age difference between the two of them?
Oh man, let me think. I think it's only 3 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so they very much can be into the same things. Like, you know, my brothers.
It's funny how different they are though. Like they're very different kids, you know?
Oh yeah. Yeah, and it's also, I think that's a very interesting point too, to say, you know, you've got a group of people that come. It's like a tree branch, you know what I mean? Like you've got like the big branch, which are the parents, and then you've got the smaller branches, which are the kids. And even though it's all coming from the same source, you get those situations where, you know, people couldn't be like myself and my sister or my sisters and my brother. Like we are very alike in some ways, but we all have very kind of different personalities. My brother's very into like sports and stuff like that, and my sister Jessica's always been like the very the smart one. She does logistics and stuff like that for a living now.
Oh, nice.
And then I was always kind of like the artistic one. I would be the one that'd be like, "Hey, let's do a podcast and just talk."
Right. Yeah. So here we are.
to me, it's just always been interesting because like my mom and dad, you would think when you think about the byproduct of two people, it's like, oh, but you can have so many variations in personality.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I wanted to go back to this because I know that you had mentioned it. You said that you hit like your angsty phase. Was it?
Sorry, Mom.
Because I had that too. I dyed my hair blue and just came home one day and was like, "Hey, Mom." And my grandma was coming to town like 3 days later.
Oh.
But I was just like, I'm punk rock now. Nothing to do about it.
So hardcore.
Oh, yeah, it's super hardcore.
Can't be convinced otherwise.
No, until I had to go swimming in that pool, man. I had PE. I jumped in that pool and it just turned like tidy bowl.
Oh, man.
It just went from being like
brutal.
That, like deep blue to looking like seafoam green. It was terrible.
Oh, man.
And again, I was a fat kid. So I was just, it's like, what's up? I'm so punk rock. It was bad.
Oh, God.
But like, so like your angsty, when you're talking about that angst, was that more so just like, teenage stuff and like the normal things, or were there things underlying with that? Like, because again, I know with me, I hit that phase, but my parents got divorced when I was 15. So I feel like kind of for me, that was like, well, this didn't really work out so much. And I really like, I was really into kind of like that punk rock culture. Like I like just like the 3-piece, like fast bands and like stupid lyrics and angry things.
Yeah.
And I relate a lot to this because this isn't working so well. So was there anything like that going on, or was it just kind of like, normal teenager stuff? Or?
Yeah, that's such a good question. So I think it was a little bit of both. Because I think it started out probably just like sort of normal, like preteen, teenage stuff. I got super into writing poetry, and it was like so sad and dramatic. But like at that point in time, like, and especially for someone who's already like sensitive and like has big feelings, like your feelings are so big, like you're in puberty, and it's like you literally just feel everything like times 10, right?
Yeah, and you're not really given like a decoder ring at that age to be
like,
oh, this is what this feeling means.
Right,
like,
and you're just like, you're learning how to deal, Right. And so I think part of it was that for sure. I also think that part of it may have been, so like my brother's parents were married, so my stepdad and my mom were married, and they're just very different. And I think that at a certain point in time, they're obviously divorced now, but at a certain point in time, things started to sort of shift a little bit, and I definitely picked up on that. And I think that, growing up, my mom was married before that, and that relationship was really unhealthy, and so I experienced that as a kid. Like there was some different things going on there, domestic violence, just some different stuff, right? And so living through that with my mom and I were sort of enmeshed as far as like I was always incredibly protective of my mom. And so I think when things started to like get a little rocky there, my immediate response obviously is like, well, I have to defend this person. And I think, like that was a struggle a little bit with my relationship with my brother's dad, who I now have, a great relationship with and I love very, very much. And I think part of it was probably that too. And then when they split up, it definitely, I also discovered, so my dad is like a music junkie, and I was also super into grunge music at that like point in time, right? So like my dad used to love to buy me CDs. We would go to Walmart, and that was when we still went to Walmart to buy CDs, right? So we would go to Walmart, and like he would be showing me all these CDs, and I just like music was the way that my dad and I really bonded. But I was like super into Nirvana and super into what else?
You like Pearl Jam?
Yeah, my dad was really into Pearl Jam.
I love Pearl Jam.
Super into Soundgarden. That was one. Yeah, well, we can discuss music in a little bit because that's such a like core piece of who I am.
And flannel shirts.
Yeah, man. Like I was super into it, so I think I kind of was like I had all these feelings, and like I really related to the music, and I was just really like there was like some tumultuous things going on. I'd experienced some things earlier in life that just I had no capacity to process, right? And so like all of those things kind of coming to a head with just like being in that age group is just, it's just so intense. And so I think, definitely part of it was that. And then I think I was really bummed when my mom and my stepdad split up, because that was the first time that I had like a family unit, 2 brothers and, 2 parents in the household, and we like went on family vacations and we did all this stuff. And so to kind of like shake that up a little bit, I like what kid wouldn't be like angry about that a little bit, you know? So I think it's just a culmination of a lot of things coming together.
Yeah, and I mean, I could definitely see that, especially, you know, with you talking about that first relationship that your mom was in, and then you two getting out of that.
Yeah, definitely.
I mean, I could imagine it kind of being like, and I definitely don't want to speak for you or anything like that, but the way that I kind of see it in my head would be that, like, it would be like, okay, Mom, it's me and you. And then
yeah, absolutely.
World. And then to be able to then kind of have, because I mean, I'm sure, because I know even after my parents got divorced, there's, you know, part in your head where you're kind of like, well, you know, it'd be nice to like, yeah, I mean, it's like it didn't work
to like
out,
be
but
in,
it would be
have
nice
a normal
if it
family.
did.
Yeah.
So I'm
whatever
sure,
that means.
Yeah, right. What you know, and I think that's another thing too is that you get older and you're like, wow,
like everyone's family's crazy.
Yeah,
okay, yeah, like
for
cool.
Sure. Like, yeah, there is no, and that's the crazy thing. Like, my parents got divorced. My dad remarried. For a good while, it was like not good. You know, like we could go see our dad if we wanted to. We didn't. He didn't really come out and see us, and there was a lot of hostility there. And I think I really give the credit to my mom, because it came to a point where she was like, look, you know, 15, 20, 30 years from now, are you going to regret not having this? And you know, that's how she talked to us about it, but I didn't realize it at the time, but that's what she was doing for herself. She was like, I have to, because they were like best friends. So my mom was like, okay, I have to forgive this person.
Right, yeah.
You know
Going
what I
through
mean?
her own process.
Right.
Yeah.
And now it's like, you know, like I text my stepmom all the time and things like that. But it's when you're that age, you're like, you've got like that.
Like life is already so hard,
yeah.
you know,
to
just be that age.
I don't want to say like leave it to Beaver, but I guess like for our age, like that home improvement, like
mom,
dad,
absolutely,
you know, the family matters kind of thing. Like, oh, that's not what it's like at all. And then same with, you know, with Kara's family, she's got half brothers and things like that, but it's all just like we're brother sister. It's like he's my brother-in-law, he's not my like half brother-in-law, you know. So yeah, I can imagine having that, like, okay, I finally got this, and then that deteriorates, especially being at that age. It can kind of wear on you or weigh on you a little bit heavy. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
Excuse me. So, you know, I was kind of wondering, sorry, I lost my train of thought for a second, but,
it's okay.
No, I was kind of wondering, so, you know, what happened after that split, right? Because I kind of want to dig through the thought process a little bit of, you know, again, because I think there's probably some people that are listening. I know, you know, we have some, I don't know if I told you this or not, but we have got some listeners in the UK now.
Oh, cool.
We've got some listeners in like South Africa. Yeah.
Nice.
So, you know, there's people listening like way bigger than I thought, like within 6 weeks, which I'm super, super excited about. So I think there are some people out there that, you know, maybe going through the same thing, or maybe, you know, absolutely. Like, so kind of talk a little bit about like, what was that transition like for you?
Yeah. So I want to start sort of at the end, and then I just want to, because things are so different now. And I think that that's so important for me to acknowledge, especially kind of digging up the past and like sharing those experiences with people who don't know my family or know like how it turned out. Right. So my mom is now in recovery, and she it'll be 5 years in March, awesome. 5 years clean. So it's a big deal, you know? But I think kind of when they split up is when my mom's battle with substance abuse started to really start to go downhill a little bit. And so, they split up, and some of it's fuzzy. I think you block out pieces of it, you know, and I've done a lot of work, and I've done a lot of healing and a lot of, you know, good stuff in between now and then to kind of get to a better place. But I think that, things started to sort of go downhill there. And I actually moved out of my mom's house when I was 16 years old. Wow. And I went to live with my dad and my grandparents. And so, things sort of got rocky after that. And I think my mom had a lot of really heavy and unhealed things from her childhood, and from that point forward, not long before before they split, maybe a few years before that, we lost my granddad, the one that lived, next door to us. And there was a point in time. Yeah. And so there was a point in time where he raised my mom, like where my mom lived with him for a little while. And they always had an incredibly close relationship. My mom's dad died when she was young. And so he was like the only father figure in her life. And there was a period of time where he was like her sole caregiver for a little while. And so she was really, really close to him. And I think that loss really took a toll on her. And it just compounded all the other things that she hadn't yet unpacked and dealt with. And so I think just lost in that grief and then losing this, relationship and this sort of family that, I feel like most people want that. Like you want this sort of, whatever your expression of that is, like people want this sort of life where you feel like you've built something and you have a family and you have people that love you and you have a purpose and you have all this stuff, right? And so I think that things kind of started to go downhill. And I think I got to a point where my relationship with my mom just wasn't very good for a while. And I just felt super alone. And I had a hard time being there. And so I just started kind of staying at my dad's more often. And then I just... my mom would be at work and I would come pick up a couple things and take them to my dad's house. Yeah. Out. And eventually I just didn't go back home, And so I think that was a huge transition. I think that was a big catalyst for me, for things that I would then deal with later in life and still we're always growing. We're always healing and learning and doing all of those things. And so I think that was definitely a catalyst for some things that I would have to sort of unpack and deal with later. But yeah.
How did she, because, I could also see it because I know that you said that, your granddad had kind of raised her and things like that. But it also sounds like, he had a little bit of a hand in raising you. I mean, if you were hanging out in the farm
absolutely.
With him. So, I mean, I'm sure a loss like that can kind of just the ripples, you know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
I just, and I've talked about this before, but, I've never had, my grandfather passed away recently and, we had we had a good relationship, but we weren't close.
Right.
He couldn't. He knew that I played music and that I should have been in college. That's kind of the talk track. But he couldn't be oh, this is his favorite band, or we'll do this together, or stuff like that. So I haven't had someone that I've been close to like that, but I can imagine that, especially if it's someone who played that big a role in your life, and then as your mom being hey, you played a role in my life, and then I watch you now play a similar role in my daughter's life. I mean, I can imagine that would be just a really hard hit to take.
Yeah.
So how did she deal with, because, kind of what we're talking about before, it sounds like there was a certain point where it was it's me and you versus everybody. So how did she take that when it was, okay, well, now I'm here?
Yeah. I think that she didn't. I think at a certain point, you're running from feelings, and so I worked in substance abuse for several years, which is how I met Kara and how, and so I think that doing that was a lot about my own healing. And I just learned a lot. And I think at a certain point, it's, the things that are kind of slipping away, but you just don't have this ability to get a grasp, and you're just so lost, and you're just running from your feelings, and to come down and be grounded in reality for a minute is just too painful. It's too much, And so I think our relationship sort of starting to deteriorate, and then not having that same bond that we had for my entire life, I think I can't imagine how difficult that was for her. And I don't feel like at that point in time, you can't look at it because it's just one more thing, what I mean? And so I think that's why my Mom Finding Recovery has been so beautiful, and so just we probably have a better relationship now than we've ever had. We definitely have a healthier relationship now than we ever have, right? Because when you kind of go through those experiences like I did when I was a kid, and you sort of you have this sort of trauma bonding where it's we survived this thing together. That's a shared experience, is one of the biggest things people can
It's like
bond
people
over.
There's stories of people surviving plane crashes, and then they're like, okay, we're best friends now.
Yeah,
Like,
absolutely.
we went through this thing together, and nobody else, nobody other than somebody else who's gone through that experience would understand.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's very, and I think you make a really good point as far as the running aspect, because I feel like that's something that we tend to talk about, I think, more in people with substance abuse issues. Like, they're doing this because they're running from their problems, things like that. But I feel, and I've even noticed, like, with myself, I feel like, even people who don't have that obstacle, like, we find a way to do that. I know for me, if I'm, like, stressed out about something, I'm going to play this video game for 6 hours because I can be a cowboy in the Old West. And
I can check out of my life for a minute.
Right. Or I'm going to put on this movie or like 3 movies. I'm just going to sit here. And and I wanted to ask you this because, you have worked in that substance abuse field and things like that. I mean, what do you think, in your opinion, what do you think makes it so easy to do that? To just be able to find something to switch off like that?
Yeah, I think part of it is human nature. I think that we're obviously averse to pain, and that's a survival instinct, And there's so much really interesting research and a lot of interesting writing out there about, the impact of childhood trauma and how we, those first years of life are so crucial, like developmentally, and the relationship you have with your caregivers during that time really set the foundation for the relationship that you learn to have with yourself and then eventually learn to have with other people. And I think if that is interrupted or it's not stable or your caregiver is not in a place where they can really like set a solid foundation for those experiences, it's not even just that you consciously decide like, oh, I'm going to not experience this. It's that you just don't have the tools. It's like you've never... It's almost as if it didn't get switched on. Like the ability to cope with things just wasn't, it was underdeveloped, right? And so at a certain point, it's less about let me not deal with this situation, let me run away from it. Because I think that's kind of an easy thing to say, is let me run away from my problems, or that person's just running from their problems, right? But it's another thing to look at the underlying factors of that and say like, oh, well, that makes sense. Like, given the circumstances, how could a person have turned out any differently, Right.
Or they're coping, but that's
their way of coping.
I think you're right. Instead of saying, hey, they're running, like they're coping, it's just this is how they know how to do it because they don't have that skill set. Yeah, I think that's because looking at my parents' relationship, I've always been someone that and I know that, I have friends who are in like substance abuse. I have friends who are therapists and things like that. And I don't know if this is necessarily like a popular thing, but I've always had you can either let things happen to you and then you're the way you are because of those things happening to you, or things can happen to you and then you can be who you are in spite of those things happening to you. You know what I mean? And I think you're right, kind of talking about it through. It's like, well, maybe it isn't that they're being this way because something happened to them, but it's this happened to me and I don't know how to deal with it. I don't know how to cope with it. And now, that's why I'm doing these substances, or I'm, filling the void with sexual partners or something like that. It's because that's, what that makes you feel good or helps you get through it.
Yeah.
No, I think that's, see, I never thought that helped me think of something differently. So I
think something else that's really interesting is a lot of times there's this sort of debate on when something becomes a problem, right? So it's like, well, how often do I have to like drink, or how often do I have to like gamble to like really have a problem with this? And I think that the key piece that a lot of people are missing is that like, anytime that you're using something outside of yourself to change your experience, to change the way that you feel, to try to fix what's going on inside of you, like that's not healthy. if you do it in excess, right? So sometimes it's like, if I've had a really shit day and like I want to come home and like watch a comforting movie and like eat ice cream on my couch, like obviously that's fine. But it's like if all I ever do to deal with my problems is come home and sit on my couch and eat ice cream, like obviously at some point that's not going to be beneficial for me anymore. I'm not right. I'm not going to be protecting myself or like nurturing myself. And I think at some point, you kind of cross this threshold where it becomes an issue. And so anything can kind of become that issue. And I think that was one of the really interesting things that I learned, and then I ended up teaching people who came in for treatment, is that, co-occurring disorders and co-occurring addictions it's more common than not. Like realistically, we all use something to change the way we feel from time to time, right? And so it's like figuring out, how do I balance that with good things and not let it become self-destructive. So just like exercise is something that was really crucial in the program that we ran, right? Like they did some sort of exercise every day to reconnect with your body. And a lot of times in active addiction, you neglect your body, or you spend a lot of time doing damage to your body. And so just learning how to like care for your body again it's just such a healing thing, right? And so important. But also we would have patients there who had co-occurring like eating disorders. And so part of their addiction was that they over-exercise. They exercise for 4 or 5 hours a day, right? So like anything in excess, but it's like, what's the intention, right? The intention, I think, is really what's important behind it. Like, why am I doing this,
And I mean, I definitely understand that and it's something that I hate to admit, especially in a platform where like a lot of people could be watching it, but mine is food, 110%. Like Kara and I, like, we'll get into an argument about something, or something will happen and I'll be depressed or stressed out, and it'll be like 12:30 and I'll be like, Uber Eats, and I get McDonald's, and it gets to my house. I order at 12:30, it gets there at 1:30, and then I just smash. I eat way more than I should, and then I swear to God I do this, and it makes me feel terrible. I take it and I go outside and I put it in the outside trash can, and I'm like, I'm not going to tell Kara that I got that. And then every morning, the next day I wake up, I go, I got McDonald's last night.
Right.
It's out the outside trash can. I wasn't going to tell you, but I have to tell you. It
eats at you.
Well, it's a shame.
Yeah,
you know
totally.
I mean? And I think what finally got me is Uber Eats sent me now I don't live in like, we don't live in like Nashville, or I don't live in Murfreesboro, but it's not that big. But I got an email from Uber Eats. I was like, congratulations on being the #1 Uber Eats customer in your city.
Oh,
and
man.
I was like, you dicks.
Right to the heart.
No, don't tell me that.
No,
that's something that like you don't
I'm not
send.
proud of this.
Like, some dude's like beating you by like 100 orders. You need to step it up. But they're just like, hey, fat guy, thank you. So I was like, no, I can't. So I've gotten a lot better, unless Kara and I are, we're getting dinner and want to have it delivered. But I've done really well at like not doing like the 12:30. Yeah. So I mean, if I could see if one day I was like, you know what, I'm gonna, instead of doing Uber Eats, I'm gonna smoke crack. I could be like, I could see myself being like, oh, I'm gonna smoke crack all the time, and I don't know if I would be as open, or to wake up the next morning and be like, hey, I smoke crack, and I just think that you should know. I think
there's a different kind of shame, and I think so much of that shame comes from stigma and just not understanding, and it becomes this like moral dilemma where this person is just lacking morally versus like, what was the foundation for this person? So like in my mom's case, she saw drug use at a really young age, right? And so it's like that wasn't something that seemed just like super taboo or super out of the ordinary for her. And so it makes sense that it's like, oh, well, that's something that can sort of help me deal or help me like get through this period of time or whatever it is. And so I think that's really important context, and I think that when it comes to like deciding socially, like how to handle some sort of social problem, which, we have the opioid epidemic, and there's like a lot of discussion going on about this kind of stuff, right? And it's like the context is so important. You can't just isolate a piece of it and say, well, this is what I'm going to make my judgment on, right? Like the context is super crucial. And so it's like, coming from a sociology background, you start to analyze these things in a different way. So you say like, well, not just well, why is this person choosing to use drugs? It's like, well, where does this person come from? What was it like growing up for them?
Right.
What was their socioeconomic status? Do they belong to a minority group? Like, these are all factors that are so important, right? And they provide this context that suddenly becomes the puzzle pieces that you're missing, right?
Right. Yeah, and I think too, like, I mean, especially with the opioid epidemic, I think, or epidemic, and that was the wrong word, epidemic, I think that one in particularly is really hard. I have a hard time, like you said, I think it's very easy to look at somebody and be like, why are you doing this? You know what I mean? Oh, this person.
Why are you making these bad choices?
Right. Or, get yourself clean, you junkie. You know what I mean? But especially with opioids, what I think a lot of people, and maybe now, more people realize, but it's like, it's not like these people started off doing heroin. You know what I mean? Like, you fall at work and hurt your back, and you've got a doctor who's, being taken on boats by on yachts by pharmaceutical reps, and taken out to steak dinners and be like, hey, so it's not addictive. Just give this out as much as you want to. And then you've got pain clinics that are giving out 100,000 pills a month. You know what I mean? They're just pumping them out, and you've got, and I forget the name of the family, but there's the entire family that like just has made so much money off of the. I'll fact check it. I mean, I'll find the name of them, but and then they were donating money to museums and all these different like cultural things, so that it was keeping their name in good standing and presenting this image, and then they're making just ass loads of money off of people being sick, and because you start. You start on something that the doctor gives you, and then they won't fill your prescription anymore, and you're hooked onto it. Now it's like, well, I'm just gonna, I can go get it here and shoot up, and you know what I mean. It's
and there's so many layers to it. So it's interesting. A lot of, I feel like it's viewed so differently. So like obviously heroin is an opiate, right? And so I think there's this even within this sort of subgroup of people who are using substances, it's almost like there's a hierarchy, right? And so like I heard so many people say, oh, well, at least I didn't stick a needle in my arm, or at least I didn't do this, or I didn't do that. And so there's so much added stigma for that piece of it, but there were, the majority of people that I worked with, you had to be 18 to come to the center that I worked at, right? And so my typical demographic was somewhere between like 18 and 35. So like these are young women that we're talking about, because I worked just in the women's side of things. They had things separated. And so these are young women, right? And so many of them, especially towards the end, because I was there for 3 years. And so what it kind of started out as, and like our typical demographics sort of evolved over time. And I really got to sort of see these patterns. And there would be people that would come in and their drug of choice was heroin. And it started out with pain pills. It's like just occasionally like getting some pain pills from a friend and just like whatever. And eventually like they're using heroin now, right? Because it's more affordable than it is to go buy pain pills, because there's such a market for it. Like it's absolute insanity. And there's been so much, crackdown, and there's been a lot of like sweeps in Tennessee and doctors getting arrested and different things. And I think that there's just so many layers to it, Yeah,
it really is, because, when I was growing up in Michigan, definitely like, I'm sure there was kids doing pills and when I was in high school and stuff like that, but I don't, and the kids I remember doing it, it was you were like, oh, those 6 kids,
totally.
They all get together and do pills together,
right?
Where most people were smoking weed, most people were drinking, and I remember that there was a couple kids whose parents had a lot of money, and those were the kids that did coke. And it was just, those were the things.
Yeah.
And then,
once again, there's a hierarchy there, and it's reflected in their socioeconomic status, their race, there's a lot of, really interesting it's statistics there.
Well, exactly. It wasn't, I mean, you could, if you were somewhere and you saw that happen, you were like, oh, that makes sense. He's got the money to do that.
Absolutely.
And so I didn't really know, you know what I mean? I graduated and I was, I lived in Michigan for a long time after I graduated, but then I moved down to Tennessee, and the way that I heard people talk about it, it was like popping chewing gum, like, oh yeah, oh, I did so many pills, blah, blah. And I'm like, dude, like it was complete. I mean, there's that Scarecrow song or whatever out of that Scarecrow, what are you? It's terrible.
Yeah,
but it's like,
God.
like I met a bunch of people like, yeah, no, I love that song.
Right,
You know
yeah.
I mean? And so it was definitely a culture shift for me. And it's something, I'll be honest, and I definitely want to backtrack a little bit and kind of talk about how you got, into the substance abuse field and then how we are to where we are now. But it's just, it's one thing that's been really scary to me is, I've got a kid, you know what I mean? And my kid is going to be, it seems like kids are starting younger and younger, you know what I mean? So it's like trying to figure out, like, when am I going to have this talk? When am I going to be like, hey, so, you may be in 7th grade and there's kids taking their parents, Roxy's or whatever, so it's like, when do I have that conversation? How do I have that conversation to make sure they understand the seriousness of it? You know what I mean? Like, that's been a whole, that just, Karen and I have been talking about that, but like, how do we, talk to them about the internet? You know what I mean? How do we be like, hey, you got a whole generation of boys out there who are watching stuff on your phone that is nothing like real life. Yeah. So like, when do we have that conversation,
Absolutely. Yeah. Wow.
And so I can't, like, I'm really hoping that there's some kind of crackdown, or like, I don't even want to say crackdown, because I feel like that goes, after people who, because at the end of the day, people with these addictions stuff, they're sick. It's not like, it's an illness.
Absolutely.
So I wouldn't want to do anything that's, let's like throw the book at all these sick people. But I hope that there is something where it's like, it's regulated. We get people help. Something that kind of puts the lid back on the box.
Yeah. So, and at that point, it's, it should be less about, let's look at legally what we can do, and more about what can we do socially to sort of help people who come from the conditions that typically, we see a spike in substance abuse disorders, right? Yeah. Because realistically, coming from a certain background, growing up impoverished, or even just so often in politics, we hear all these candidates, and it's the middle class, it's the middle class, it's the middle class. But realistically, where I grew up, I didn't know very many people who were middle class. I didn't even, I thought that I had no idea that, we were poor growing up, And I think that there are so many social circumstances and so many social factors to that it can't be treated separately from that. So yes, there's a lot of legal things that we need to do. And I think a lot of that starts at the very top with the pharmaceutical companies, and all the way down to the individual doctors who are writing these prescriptions. There is so much that can be done as far as regulation and different things like that.
Well, and I think pain management.
Yeah, absolutely.
It seems like for a long time, and hopefully it's not like this as bad now, but it seems like for a long time it was like whatever you went in for was like, here you go, handful of opiates.
Yeah.
Like, you're good. So maybe kind of looking at more holistic and alternate ways to...
I think ultimately it's about accountability.
Yeah.
And so, yes, they are accountable for their individual actions, right? But I feel like the opioid epidemic needs to be treated as a public health crisis, because that's what this is, right? And so, yes, those people are accountable for their individual actions, but again, the context is extremely important, and a lot of the accountability needs to go to the people who perpetuate these problems, right? So it's like these pharmaceutical companies, and the doctors, and the job that I work in now, we see a lot of patients who have chronic pain, and they come in a lot of times because they're going in for a spinal cord stimulator procedure, which is to help them. It's an alternative way to deal with pain, right? So it's like this internal pain pump. And the amount of people that come in and say, I just want to be off these pills. I'm so tired of going to this pain clinic. And these pills, and after a certain point, right, your body builds up tolerance and they don't help. And so you have to continue to take more and more. And again, that's a lot of people end up switching to something illicit because they're not getting the relief that they need from it. So there's so many facets to this, right? And I just think that the shift really needs to be made to dealing with addiction as a public health issue. And I think that so much of that also comes with being able to receive mental health treatment. I still work in the mental health field. I work in a clinical psychology practice, and I'm now working in the billing department, so I deal with insurance companies and things like that a lot. And I like what I do because I feel like what I do is help patients be able to use their benefits, right? But like insurance companies also need to be held responsible for this kind of stuff because there are so many times where people want some sort of alternative option and the insurance just won't pay for it.
Yeah.
So it's like there's so much structural change that needs to happen before we can really start to see relief from these sort of problems. And I think that it's very easy when the system is already there and it's in place and it's got these structures and these bones and it works for certain people, right? Like there's a percentage of people that the current system works really well for, but those are not the people who are seeking but those are not the people who are seeking treatment. And if they are, they have the ability to get the best treatment. So many of these people who really need treatment don't have the financial means. Maybe they don't have insurance. And a lot of them are young people. And there's this gap now where people kind of get kicked off their parents' insurance, or maybe their parents don't have insurance offered through their jobs because they don't have gainful employment. Like there's so many factors to this, and people are just ultimately being left behind. They're being underserved. And I think that it's really easy, instead of looking at all that and looking at the complexity and like how do we start to tackle these really big issues, to say like, well, that's their problem because they didn't try hard enough, because it's easier for them to run from their problems, right? Like it's so easy to say that.
Pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Stop being addicted to drugs.
Yeah.
This guy made it. You can make it. Yeah. And I think we have a friend, Megan, who she's from California, was here in Tennessee going to school, and then she went to finish in the United Kingdom. And I guess over there...
Interesting transition.
Yeah, well, and definitely don't quote, but they have universal health care.
Yeah.
And so, unlike the United States, she was telling us that, unlike the United States, right, like, with what CARE has done before, she did utilization review, right? So you know what that is, but for folks who may not know, if you go into treatment or, you need your insurance company to pay for a certain amount of days or something like that, somebody in utilization review will work with that insurance company to get you the days covered. That
you're essentially a patient advocate. Like you're trying to, because insurance will find any loophole to deny you any sort of coverage, because it's all about like what they're getting paid in versus what they're paying out, right?
Yeah, because the insurance company they're your insurance company, but they don't want to pay for things that they should be paying for. And so there's somebody there that, luckily there's somebody there that's going to fight for you and try to get you what you need. But I guess over there, because it's universal health care, you can go back to rehab as many times as you want, or you can continue to come in for therapy afterward, and you're not having to worry about. So she was saying that there's people who've been in programs there for, 8-9 years off and on, because they get back, get into a better place, leave, come back. And it's when you look at that model of how we could potentially tackle mental health, because that's another big thing too. It's like, and most of the people that I know that have, and I've done therapy myself at a few times in my life, but most of the people that I know that are like, oh yeah, I go to therapy, they're more well off white folks, or
so true.
Maybe they're not off, but there's a family member who's well off. That's like, and they're in communities of color, there's a huge like stigma, and a lot of the times, from my understanding, definitely correct me if I'm wrong, but I know that a lot of the time, from what I understand, that if you're an African American and you want to go and you want to talk to somebody who can relate to what you're going through, and so there's a shortage of people of color as therapists and things like that. So it just seems like as a country we could be doing, because sometimes I felt like it's looked at, oh, this person got a bad roll of the dice. You know what I mean? Like, sorry, man, these were your parents. This is the city that you were born in.
Yeah, this is the hand you were dealt.
Figure it out. Get out if you want to get out. Whereas, if we looked at it as how do we have these things available, and how do we have them not only available, but like easily and readily available, right? Like, so I feel like that's a lot of...
There's a big difference there.
Yeah. Like, because I didn't have insurance for a while. My gallbladder, right when I got out of high school, my gallbladder was starting to stop working. And it felt like I was getting stabbed in the side with a hot knife. It was not fun. But I didn't have insurance. So I went to the hospital they did an X-ray and gave me an IV. And because they did the X-ray, gallbladder was there, but an X-ray doesn't tell you if it's moving the way that it's, doing what it's supposed to do. So like, nothing's wrong with you. Bye. Sent me out the door.
Here's a big ass bill.
Oh, sent me a bill for like $1,500, and I was 19.
Outrageous.
And so that bill didn't like go to my parents. It was like, hey kid, here you go. 19.
Dig yourself out of this hole.
Right.
Making,
I'm like, dude, I'm working at
that point in time, like making what, like $6.75 an hour or something.
I worked at Subway when I wasn't playing shows. I was not. Yeah. I mean, I was not making any money. By then I may have been delivering pizzas, stepped up in the world a little bit.
Yeah.
But then the Obamacare passed, and then they did you can stay on your parents' insurance until you're 26. Yeah. Literally, like, what
a godsend for so many people. Like, I know people talk so much shit about Obamacare, but it's like I also would have been uninsured for like most of my adulthood if it weren't for being able to be on my parents' insurance.
Well, and it was crazy because it was literally maybe so it was a month, maybe a month and a half. Now, keep in mind, the entire time, it's like I'm getting stabbed in the side, and the doctors are like, "Nothing's wrong with you. You don't have insurance, dude. Nothing's wrong with you." Like, we were recording a record, and I was like singing, and it hit, and I just hit the floor. I was like fetal position, and they rushed me to the emergency room. That's when I got the IV and the X-ray and the huge ass bill. But I got on my parents' or my mom's insurance about a month and a half later. Went back to the hospital, and they're like, "Oh, you've got insurance now. Let's check it out." I was getting surgery the following day. Yeah. Because they were like, "Oh yeah, your gallbladder's just not working." But nobody cared to look, until they knew that the insurance
they write it off at that point, because it's like, realistically, who has $1,500 to just like sling at a hospital bill? Like, that people, especially people of that age, like it's just not feasible, right? But I think once again, it's like this structural issue with like, this is what happens when you have a for-profit healthcare industry. Like, you're literally profiting from people's illness. Like, there's a fundamental problem with that, No,
I definitely agree. It's I think it kind of goes back to, you're talking about the opioids, right? It's all kind of tied in. It comes back to the same thing.
All connected.
Like, these people are sick. We're continuing to funnel things to continue for them to be sick, and there's a select group at the top that are profiting very, very highly and being compensated very well for that. Yeah. And I think that's, I mean, I remember not having insurance and having to go to like a free clinic, and it's like, well, if you need to go to a free clinic,
good luck.
Well, I mean, you could find one, but you better have 7 hours of your day to just sit there, because that's the number of people who didn't have insurance. So you're just sitting there waiting, and you can tell too, like with the doctors, it's like you've seen 40 other people before they see you, because it's just like, we got to take them as fast as we can. So you get in there, and they're just like, "What's wrong? Okay, this is what. Okay, here you go. Bye." Yep. You know what I mean?
Quality of care just tanks.
It's definitely not like the most ideal. So I definitely think there is a better way that we could be doing it, as far as making those resources available, and again, making it where it's not a 7-hour process to go to a free clinic, or things like that. So I do want to backtrack a little bit, because I feel like we jumped ahead. But talk to me a little bit about, because we moved out of your mom's. You're at your dad's now. Were you in high school, or like, where were we at this point?
Yeah, I was in high school. It was
you said you were like 16.
Yeah, right? It was my sophomore year of high school. And realistically, I worked at Sonic when I was in high school, and so I just started saving up money to buy a car, because we got by, but there wasn't a lot of extra stuff. So the idea of my parents buying me a car just wasn't feasible, wasn't realistic, right? So pretty much as soon as I was old enough, I was like, I want to get a job. I worked all summer long. I saved every penny I had, and I was able to save like $1,300, something like that, working my ass off over the summer, right? Like, didn't hang out with my friends, didn't really get to do anything fun, just like busting my ass, because I was like, I really need a car. I cannot ride the bus to school next year. Like, that's just super lame. Who wants to do that?
I'm gonna be the junior on the bus.
Yeah, so I busted my ass and saved up all that money and bought a car. And I think that having the car made the decision easier, right? Because I wasn't relying on my my dad to come and pick me up or my mom to take me to meet my dad or whatever. And so I think, having some wheels and being able to sort of have that little bit of freedom, was, I mean, it made it easier for me to move out. So, I was in high school. I was living with my dad and my grandparents. And I lived there with them until I graduated high school. And around the time that I graduated, my mom she was in probably the midst of maybe not the worst of her addiction, but it was still climbing at that point in time, and so there were just a lot of things that, I mean, it's hard. It's hard to not, you don't want your parents so much maybe when you're a teenager, but you really need them. And you really need that like structure and that guidance and that, like I had that with my dad and my grandparents, but again, my dad and I, like my dad wasn't the person I go to like process my emotions and like ugly cry. And like that had always been my mom, right? And so like not having that, I just sort of started to internalize all that and just like hang on to it and put on the brave face. And, something that I still struggle with a little bit is I just felt really guilty for leaving because my brother was there, right? Okay. And like, here's my baby brother who I love more than probably I loved any other person on the planet at that point in time, right? And so leaving and feeling this sort of responsibility to take care of him, which realistically, it wasn't my place. I was also a kid, and I was also just like thrown into the middle of this like really kind of shitty situation. Right. But there was definitely some guilt there, and I think that again, that was like something that I internalized and held on to, and so not having enough places to really express that. And then around that time, I started dating my like high school sweetheart. We were together for 5 years, so that was like a really I think I really clung to that relationship as well because it was like, this is like something else for me to focus on other than like how shitty I feel and like how I feel like everything's just like falling to pieces, right? And so I got really lucky because he also had a really amazing family that really, really took me in and really like embraced me and loved me through a really hard time in my life. And so I was also super grateful for that. And I think I spent a lot of time, like I spent more time there than probably anywhere in high school. And so I sort of had these surrogate parents with his parents, and I bonded with his mom. And his dad, really. But I mean, I was able to like come to his mom, and although I didn't spill the details really to them about what was going on, I wasn't really sure at that point in time either. Like, I had an inkling that I knew what was going on with my mom, but I wasn't sure. And so, but still at that point in time, like there's this need to protect her, right? And this like, well, even if I did know, I wouldn't tell other people because like it had always, I felt like, been my duty to protect her. Yeah. And so, it was just a super tumultuous time, Yeah,
and I can imagine being at that age too, like, not to like downplay it or anything, but the whole like snitches get stitches kind of thing, because you don't realize like this isn't the way you're thinking like, okay, if I'm protecting her by keeping the secret because you're at that age and you're like, this is what I'm supposed to do. Yeah. Where when you get older, obviously, like, hey, the best way that I can protect her or help her is,
to hold the boundary.
Yeah, hold the boundary. This is how you can get help. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And so I definitely think that it sounds very in line. I mean, I feel like that's what I would have done. It's just been like, oh, don't worry, I won't tell anybody.
Well, so there are these rules, right, to like growing up in a dysfunctional family. And this is something that I learned in my own journey and going to support groups and going to, different things, which is you get these messages, even if they're not directly said to you, which is don't talk, don't trust, don't feel, right? So it's like even people that I knew that I could trust, I didn't really trust enough to open up and let them know what was going on, or to trust them with something as vulnerable as like, I think my mom might be using drugs, and I think that might be like where the crazy shit is, originating from. And so I think overcoming that is such an uphill battle. And again, it goes back to that, like the people in my life when I was younger, like, did they give me the foundation that I needed to be able to cope and to be able to know that like what's happening isn't the norm and you can talk about it, or you can, like do something different, right? So, again, just so many layers.
Well, let me ask you this, because this is something that I personally worried about, especially around that age. So, my dad has some issues with, like, severe depression. And growing up, we didn't find that out. I didn't find that out until much later, like after my parents got divorced, and then he finally, went and got diagnosed. But like during their marriage, he was always that guy that like you would have the best time in the world.
Yeah.
Like he would be like, all right, we're staying up all night and playing video games, or like, okay,
Yeah.
I'm gonna pick you up from school. We're going to, we're gonna go play laser tag or something, like, just we'll make movies in the backyard. He was always either that guy or he was the polar opposite of that guy. Like I have a very vivid memory of my parents getting into a fight. We were leaving on the way to go to church, and my dad had a dress shirt on, and they were fighting about something. And he's like, you know what? I'm not going to church. And he grabbed it and just ripped it. And I have a very vivid memory of just the buttons, like kind of flying everywhere. But that was him. It was, he's like much better now.
Right.
As far as handling those things. But I think the thing that I worried about and what I wanted to ask you is, I had a real fear, because I think I found out probably like 17 or 18 after my parents got divorced that like this is what was going on. And so I start reading and I'm like, oh, well, this is like genetic. And like I could potentially, if this could happen to me, like the most common age is like by 21, I could start seeing signs of that. And so there was a part of me that was always like, if I got depressed or if I got upset or angry about something, I was like, is this it? Is this the day that like the flip switches and then now that's my personality? And I didn't know, is that something that you ever found yourself thinking like, this is, am I going to have similar issues to this? Or if that was, I mean, it very well may not be, but I was just curious.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that, so the difference in my experiences when I was young and my mom's experiences, where I mentioned it earlier, kind of this sense of taboo. And so my mom, because of the way that, she grew up, tried really hard to make me super afraid of drugs. And realistically, I think that's why I wasn't sure for such a long time, because I got these super strong messages really early on that like, that's just not something that you want, and it's not something that's okay to do. And I think that it took me a long time to piece it together because of that, because I never really saw my mom drink until around the time that, things started to get rocky, or, and my dad is just not really a drinker. My dad's one of those people who like keeps one bottle of whiskey and like takes 4 or 5 sips of it a year, and so I just grew up with things sort of being real like moderate, or really just like not there very often. And so I got that really strong message early on that essentially drugs were bad, because you just kind of boil it down to a simple statement for kids, right? And so that was never something that I really worried about. I think it was more so, like I said, I've always been really sensitive and I've always had really big feelings. And so I think maybe there may have been a little bit of concern about like being able to regulate that. But realistically, I didn't really worry about that very much. And I think that the difference is a lot of things were explained away to me, right? And so it's like, oh, well, I could always sort of logic out, like, maybe that's why that's happening. Or, like when my mom went through a pretty serious depression when my great-grandfather passed. And, like, to me that made sense because, like, you're grieving and, like, so everything that sort of started to happen after that, I was like, well, that makes sense, So I never really worried too much about it necessarily happening to me. But
yeah, and I was just curious because I think that's, I didn't think about it that way, but to be like, because I did the DARE program, and I actually got in trouble because the day of DARE graduation, we were taking balloons and sucking in the helium so we could make our voices out. The cop was like,
Classic.
Did you not learn anything?
Classic.
But I will say I'm one of those kids that like, in because statistically DARE does not work. It's been proven.
Yeah,
but
we know that.
there are those naive kids, which was me, that I was like, drugs are so bad. Like I'm never, and like, I mean, I didn't have a drink of alcohol until I graduated from high school.
Impressive.
I promised my mom, I was like, not until I'm out of high school.
Yeah.
But yeah, I was that guy that thought like if you bought weed, it was like in an alley and the dude could potentially like stab you and you know
right,
what I mean? Like,
yeah, totally.
But I can imagine like being at that age and having something there. I think it would be different if you were like, oh, mom has a substance abuse problem.
Right, yeah.
You know?
If it was apparent, yeah.
Right. And I think for me, that's kind of when I hadn't thought about it like that, but when I made the realization that, oh, this could happen to me is when it was like, this is why. You know what I mean? Because I just always thought like he was either in a good mood or a bad mood.
Right,
you know,
yeah.
Until I found out, oh, no, like there's a reason.
Right, yeah.
And so, yeah, I hadn't really thought about it like that. Because I can imagine if they were, if my dad was just like, yeah, just, sometimes I get upset and this is what was going on. I'd be like, oh, yeah, who's mad about this?
That makes
so
sense.
It makes sense, right?
Yeah.
So you're living, you get your car, right? Which has got to feel good because I know we were talking about it a little bit before, but, like talking about being middle class, right? Like, it's funny because I think as a kid, you have a very clear image in your head of like what a poor person is.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like, oh, especially being someone who like lived near Detroit. It's like, oh, like this is a poor person. This is,
right.
They're begging for change and they're on the street corners and stuff like that.
It's almost synonymous with like homelessness, right? Like that's what I thought. But, like I grew up, like I said, out in the sticks and like I tell people sometimes about like, they're like, what was it like to like grow up out in the country, blah, blah, blah. And I talk about like, we had well water, like we didn't have city water. And so like, that was normal to me. And I was like, oh yeah, like my water just, like my water just like it comes from this spring and yada, yada, yada. So, like I would tell people sometimes like, yeah, like, so in the wintertime, like we, if our pipes would freeze up, we wouldn't have water, right? And so like we would have to like go to our neighbor's house and like fill out these 5-gallon buckets and like to be able to like flush the toilet or like I had to brush my teeth with bottled water sometimes or whatever. And I was like, oh, that's just because of where we live. But also it was like and it was, like I said, we got by, like we never went hungry. I always had clothes to wear. I got new clothes for school. Yep. But realistically we weren't middle class because real people who are like really middle class could live on investments and they could live on like they have different sorts of like disposable income and things like that. So that to me, those were like rich people. Yeah. And then there was like ultra rich people, so it was, yeah, it's crazy. Very different.
Well, and that too, it's like, oh, well, this is just this way because this is where I live.
Yeah.
And when you're that age, you're not like, well, what are the reasons that I live here?
Exactly.
You know what I mean? Like, yeah. We lived in a town called Plymouth Canton, which is, a nice suburb of Detroit. But before that, we lived in Madison Heights, which is John R. and 8 Mile, which is very close to like maybe 10 minutes from downtown Detroit. Like the only reason that we moved to the suburb that we did is because, my grandparents were like, you can't live here. Like, you've got kids, you need, so my dad had gotten a job and they were like, you need to be there. So they helped get the house. You know what I mean? But when you're that age, you don't, it doesn't compute. You're not like, oh, well, I've got a house, I've got clothes. And like the reason we got new back to school clothes every year, was was because of my grandparents and stuff like that. But when you were talking about the car,
junky ass car. But I loved it. I was so proud of it.
Well, it strikes a chord with me because I wanted to play. I got an acoustic guitar when I was 13, and I was like, "This is what I want to do. I love this." Yeah. And then I got to a point where I was like, "No one's buying me. If I want an electric guitar, if I want a new amp, if I want something, nobody's buying any of that for me." So I got my first job. I was 14. And I was working at this pizza place called Papa Romano's, and I worked there as a busboy for a little bit. And then I got a job offer to work under the table at a meat market. This place called Eastern. Oh no, it was not nice.
I just like in my mind, I was like, man, I can't imagine what that would smell like.
Oh my god,
oh god.
So I was.
I was a vegetarian for years, John. Yeah. So I'm kind of like.
Well, I'm the cleanup guy. So they would cut up a whole pig on this big saw. Oh god. And then my job was to go in and be like, clean the saw. Just open it. It was so bad.
That's brutal, man.
I left we were unpacking stuff and we were about to close for Christmas. And I was in a rush to get out of there and I left a whole turkey in a box and didn't realize it. And so we left. We were closed for like 4 days
God.
for Christmas, and they opened the door and they were like, "What does that smell?"
Yeah.
And it was just "Hey, John, you left this turkey." I was like, "Merry Christmas." Like,
You're welcome.
but yes, I mean, but that's, I was doing that same thing because it was like I wanted those things. What I mean?
Totally.
It's like I think at a certain point you kind of realize like, oh, nobody's doing this for me. Like if I want to do it.
Yeah, and those were just some of the values that I grew up with, right? And I joke all the time that my dad's, the message I got from my dad, even if, non-directly, was basically like, if you're not sick enough that you need to be like at the doctor's office, like if you're not dying, get your ass up and go to work, right? Like that's just where I come from. And so I was so excited to get a job and be able to like work for things like that, which is, instilled in me in a really early age. Like if you want something, then you need to be willing to put in what it takes to get it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, and I think the other thing too is that like, especially nowadays, I don't think that same work ethic is instilled in kids that age.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like, I don't know very many parents who have like 14-year-old kids and like, yeah, they're work. Yeah, they're, it's like just not have to. So, and I mean, maybe it's just the people that I know now, that might meet some, there might be plenty of kids out there that are that age that are, busting to get what they need and things like that. But it just seems like kind of like they're just being able to go out in the woods and play by yourself.
Right. Yeah.
Some of those things have kind of slipped away. And I realize I sound like it's super old, man. Like,
I say that all the time, like back in the day.
These damn kids.
Yeah.
So kind of go back just a little bit. I'm sorry because I keep jumping ahead. But so you're in this relationship, right? And from what it sounds like there's all of this kind of crazy, chaotic stuff going around you. But this is like the one good thing or something that you have some kind of control in.
Mm-hmm.
And you've got the connection with his mom and things like that. I know you. Obviously, that's not who you're with today.
Right. Yes.
Right. But talk to me a little bit about like coming out of that. Like, where do we go next? Right. Because I know that you went to school for sociology and again, ended up working in substance abuse. Like, kind of talk to me. What were those next steps?
Yeah. So I think that that was where a lot of growth happened, right? So like we were together for 5 years. It ended in somewhat like it was mutual terms that we ended it, right? Mm-hmm. And then like there was a lot of stuff that happened afterwards, and I think that I just didn't have a lot of stability in my life outside of him and his family, right? Mm-hmm. And so like not only did I like lose this relationship that I kind of had stored my identity in, because again, it's like one of these things that it's like it's almost an escape from my life, because my life kind of sucks right now, Right. So you lose that and like this little piece of your identity and this thing that you've been like really equating with who you are, but then you also lose the family piece of that. And mm-hmm. So it wasn't just his parents, like even his great grandparents, like we used to go and see every weekend, and like I bonded with them. It was like losing a family all over again, right? And so it's like this whole like re-traumatizing.
I'm sure at that age too, there's a big part of you that's like, this is the person I'm going to be with, when you're visiting.
Oh, totally. You're so naive, Yeah.
Oh my God, I'm so glad I met you so young.
Yeah.
I'm just set for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I can imagine, like, and especially like with what your mom and you went through in her first marriage, and then having your stepdad, and then that kind of imploding on itself, and then now you've got your own relationship, and then you're having that separation again.
Yeah.
I mean, I can definitely see where it would be like, okay, it was
like having the rug pulled out from under me, right? And it's like, it was time, like we had outgrown each other. Like I said, it was a mutual decision at the time. But it was like losing all of this like stability that I had in my life, and then just being catapulted into that. And at that time I was in community college, and my mom was still in active addiction. I had moved out of my grandparents' house where my dad also stayed, because at that time it was my grandparents, my dad, myself, my cousin, and my cousin's daughter. And this is a 3-bedroom house. Like this is like maybe a 1,500 square foot house, right? That they built, like because their kids were grown. Like this was like going to be the place that they lived, right? And like the whole family is there. So I moved out of there, and I had actually moved in with my boyfriend and his parents. So I lived with them for a few years. And then when we split up, it was kind of like, where do I go? Like, because normally, like, if something like that happens, like, you go home, right? But it's like, well, where is home? Because in that process of like, the place that I called home that I grew up with my mom had been foreclosed on and taken away from us. So like this like family home, like where my grandfather lived in this farm, and like we had lost that, and so it's like that was like my home base. So like we don't have that. My mom's kind of MIA for a little while, and my dad and my grandparents' house is full. Like where am I supposed to go? And so I ended up crashing here and there with different people, and my mom was kind of in and out during that time too. So. Yeah. My grandmother, my mom's mom, lived with a family friend, and so I ended up crashing on their couch for a while. But I had all my shit in my car, like I was kind of living out of my car. And so I lived with them for a little while, kind of crashing on their couch, and then I crashed with my mom and a friend that she lived with for a while, and I was just kind of bouncing back and forth before I got my own apartment. And that was like having a sit-down conversation with Dad, like, I'm in school right now, and I always did really well in school, right? So like grades started to slip a little bit. Like there's just not a lot of stability, so it's really hard to like focus on schoolwork when like,
where am I going to sleep?
Yeah, shit's crazy, right? And it's like I always had somewhere to go, so I wasn't like living on the street or anything like that. Right. But eventually was able to like get an apartment and move in and live there for a while. And so I was there until I then obviously transferred from community college over to MTSU and lived in my apartment by myself. But I think that's the time that, like you're early into adulthood, that's such a like really difficult transition from like going to high school to like being in college. And like I had a job obviously because I had rent to pay. Like I lived by myself, right? So like I had rent to pay, I had things going on, and I just felt like I was spinning all these plates. And so I think that takes a toll on your mental health. And I think that's like when I really like started to struggle with a lot of that. Like I had all of this like stuff from childhood that like came up that definitely needed to be addressed and worked on. And then there was like this leftover stuff from like the relationship, and then there was school and work, and there was just like so much going on. So I think that was a really critical time. It was a time of like discovering who am I, what's my story, really claiming that story, like learning that like, okay, like I'm not a victim of life, right? Like, yeah, I've been through some shit. Like the road has not been smooth to get here, right? But really starting to like come into my own power and like really start my journey, because things got bad for a while. Like I was having panic attacks, and I had some pretty intense depression, and there was a lot of stuff going on. But I think that period of my life was so defining and so like critical to the person that I am now, and the things that I've been able to do, and the adventures that I took to like piece myself back together, and I think that, like so much of who I am comes from that little period of time where I'm kind of thrust out into the world, and it's like, here kid, figure it out, you know?
Well, it's those struggles that define us, it's if you don't really have any challenges in life, if you don't have any obstacles that you have to figure out how to overcome, if you don't take a couple, as ridiculous as it sounds, if you don't take a couple hits on the chin and then be able to get yourself pulled back up, you're not going to be able to deal with the like big things that happen. You know what I mean? It's definitely.
Resilience is, I feel like resilience is something that is sort of innate, but also it's like a muscle. So it's like if I don't ever have to like overcome things, then obviously my resilience is sort of low because it's just not something that I use very often. So you learn how to become resilient, and you learn how to begin to trust yourself, and how to just like jump into something, both feet in, like make a decision and run with it. And if it like implodes, and like, okay, I know not to go that way next time. It's a lot of lessons during that time of my life for sure.
No, and I definitely agree. It's if sometimes, especially when you make a decision, it doesn't matter what happens. You know what I mean?
Well, and at that age, you can like that's something that you and Bob talked about too, right? It's like that's the time to like to do things and like fuck up and like keep going, and like
you don't have any
time to take chances.
Well, and that's the thing too, is I think in the moment it is, because if you think about it, you're like, okay, I got my rent, and I've got, I got to make sure I go to school. But in that moment, that's like everything. You know what I mean? And I don't think you necessarily realize until you're a little bit older. It's like, oh yeah, that's the time that like I should be out doing the, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Like your perspective is way more skewed on in the moment than when you're on the back end. You know what I mean?
Well, and I think I have to acknowledge too that, you know, regardless of where I come from or the things that I went through, there was some privilege there that did allow me to make some different choices and make some decisions and things like that. So, yes, I was working. Yes, I was paying my own rent. Yes, I was putting gas in my car and buying my own groceries and like doing all of this stuff. But like that's the reality for a lot of people at that age. Like here you are, like go survive in the world, you know. But also, I think I was privileged in that I knew that that my dad and my grandparents especially weren't going to like let me go hungry. Like I wasn't going to be hungry. I could always come like, hey, I don't get paid until Friday. Can I have $20 to put gas in my car or something? Like I knew that I had that little bit of safety net there. And I think that that's something that really like you have to acknowledge because there's people who don't have that. Oh, yeah. And so I think that again, like the context is so important. Like, yes, my ride wasn't a smooth one, but I did have some of those things that really allowed me a little bit of breathing room, even though it didn't feel like it at the time, that little bit of breathing room to be able to make some decisions and do some things that I wanted to do. And at some point, it became less about surviving because I think I'd been in survival mode for the majority of my life, right? And especially like being thrown out into the world, like here I am, this like, at that time, like 19, 20, I was about 20 years old when things really started to shift. So like I'm a 20-year-old kid, like just like kind of thrust out into the world, right? But I had all these dreams. Like I'm a dreamer and I've always been that way. I'm like this idealist, this creative, this like, I had all these big plans for like what I wanted my life to be like. I remember my great granddad, the one that lived next door to me, bought me a globe when I was a kid. And, I still have it. Actually, it sits on the bookshelf in our living room, and I look at it sometimes, and it's like one of these little small nostalgic things that I have in my home. But I remember even at a very young age, like spinning the globe as fast as I can, and you put your finger on it, right? And it's like I have always, always, always wanted adventure. Like that was when everything else was. It didn't matter. It didn't matter what else was going on. That was something that never changed for me. Like I'm that person that gets really sucked into stories or really gets sucked into like a piece of art or whatever it is. Like I can just get lost in something like that. And it just really feeds my soul and like who I am. Right. So like having that little bit of breathing room and then just feeling confident enough in my ability to be resilient and survive, like allowed me to make some choices that also were like life-changing. Like awesome. I started traveling in college, right? I did a semester abroad.
Well, I was just going to ask. So it sounds like this is probably around the time that, or around the time period that you went to India for the first time.
Yeah. So this was when I got to first flex my adventure muscles, right? So like I had wanted to study abroad, and I just didn't make the commitment when I was in community college because a lot of times you could get a program paid for because they did scholarships, but people didn't apply because it's community college. They don't know. And so I had just been through a lot of shit, you know, and like my anxiety and my depression, like all that stuff had like hit this peak, and I was just like, something's got to give. Like I'm tired of the same old, and I get like this, like even now, I have to take a big trip every so often because I get restless. Like I start like, okay, I'm tired of the monotony. I'm tired of like, you know, there's more to life than this. And I know that. So like, I need a little piece of that to like keep going and pushing through the day to day. So I decided that it was time for me to take a trip. And I started that whole process without saying anything to anyone. And I applied for the program, got accepted, applied for scholarships, wrote some essays, did a lot of, you know, like legwork for this to happen. And I paid the deposit for the trip. Like I paid the first big installment to do this on my own. And then like it was official at that point, right? And so like I got my family together. I was like, hey, like, can we get together and like have family dinner, which we don't do. Like we're just not that family that like gets together like every Sunday. Like we just don't do that.
You're married or something?
Right. So so we go out to eat at a Mexican restaurant, and I'm like, yeah, I have something I want to talk to you guys about, and I just it's easier if we're all together, blah blah blah. And so my dad's dad, who he's not always the most eloquently spoken, right? He's just kind of one of those people that just like says what he wants to say, and that's just kind of it. He's like, "You're not pregnant, are you?"
Son of a bitch, you're pregnant.
And I'm like, "No, I'm not." Okay, no. Let's just clear the clear the air on that one. No, not pregnant.
That's good though.
Not getting married.
They went in, not even like it would be a bad thing, but they went in with like okay, this is how serious it could be. And then you get to kind of diffuse.
No, it's not that.
Yeah.
Take a breath.
Yeah.
But I said, well, I'm going to be leaving for 4 months. And they're like, what do you mean you're leaving? Blah, blah, blah. I was like, I'm going to India. And the response was like, why would you do that? You know, because my family just doesn't travel either. Yeah. Like I'm the adventurous one. Like my dad's mom is, I'd like to think that I got that from her. She's the brave one. Like she's the adventurous one. She's the one that if she could would take off and travel the world and never think twice about it. Right. So she was excited, obviously, but everyone was like, why would you do that? And why India? And I was like, I don't know, man. It just feels right. Like, and I'm not like asking you, like I'm telling you guys, I leave in like, at that point, like 5 or 6 months, I'm leaving and I'll be gone for 4 months. Yeah. But it was just like the first real like grown up decision that I was like, this is what I'm going to do. And it's intimidating and I have no idea what to expect,
and
but like
input.
Here it is. Yeah. Like I'm not asking permission, you know, just really taking that, like I'm an adult, like I am in control of my own destiny kind of thing. And at that point, like that's such a powerful like thing to hang on to. And just to say like, I'm going to go fucking travel the world, you know? Yeah.
So talk to me a little bit about that. Cause, you know, obviously it sounds like this was before, you know, you had, you know, started working at the substance abuse facility that you were working at, and before you met Kara and things like that.
Right. Yeah.
You know, describe that living in India for 4 months. What was that like? How was that?
Man.
I mean, it seems like it's imprinted on you.
Totally.
Made a big impact. So, you know, kind of
I
talk
think
a little bit about that.
even now, like I'm in a whole new phase of life now, right? But I still think that was like easily one of the best like little blips in my life. Like 4 months initially sounds like, oh, this is a long time. Like I'm super excited to be there for that long, but it goes by so fast, you know? But it was incredible. I met amazing people. I already had a travel bucket list, right, at that age. And I chose India because it's a little more intimidating, I feel like, than saying like, oh, I'm going to Europe. Not that that's like a small feat, especially when you come from podunk nowhere and no one you ever know has traveled or done any of that. Like I'm totally just like driving blind, like I'm navigating this with no like guidance or help at all, right? So it's like India obviously was a little more intimidating than some of the other places that I had on my list. And I was like, this is a great way for me to like jump into traveling. It's fully immersive. Like I'm going to be living there. And also I just always had such admiration for Indian culture. I think it's beautiful. I mean, I just think it's so vibrant. It's so full of life. It's colorful and it's sacred and it's just so many things at once. And I was just ready for something. It also was so different from where I came from and where I had been. And it was just, I'm ready for like a complete
Well, it does seem
change.
Kind of like, you know, kind of talking about two sides of the coin.
Yeah,
you
totally.
Know, like, oh, this is completely
Yeah, for sure.
So I know that you had mentioned, you know, like the color and the culture. What were some of the things that stood out to you? Like, were there things that you found there that had like surprised you, or?
Oh man.
I mean, you know, anything that kind of stuck out to you as far as like this was maybe like the gem moment of that trip or anything? Because I do understand what you're saying as far as like, you know, I could work a 40-hour work week and it seems like it takes a month to get through, but we go to the beach for a week and you blink your eye and
it's done. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, was there anything that like that you looking back are like, this is the moment that encapsulated like this is like the forever memory, or were there just so many of them?
There were a lot, in a lot of different ways, but I think the things that, I mean, culturally, it was everything that I hoped it would be and so much more. And the program that I was in was a sociology program, and so a piece of that was we had to do like community service. So I saw so many facets of life there. You know, I lived in student housing in an apartment. We had the option between an apartment and a dorm. So the apartments cost a little more in the program, right? But I was like, the apartment, you can come and go when you want to. There's not really a curfew. You know, like I wanted the freedom, and like I just wasn't really intimidated by that. And everyone approached it like, well, you should be, you know, and I'm like, yeah, but you're young and dumb and brave, you know. It's like, what do I have to lose at this point? Like,
brass. Like,
yeah, like what the hell, you know? Like what's the worst that could happen? And of course, there's a ton of like terrible things that can happen, but like you couldn't tell me that. And I'm still sort of that way when I travel. I'm like, yeah, but when am I ever going to have the chance again?
Right.
You know. So I think there was so much. I think that there was a festival that we had at the school where it was a cultural day, because it was one of the most beautiful things about India, I think, is you really underestimate like the sort of melting pot that like these Asian countries so often are as well. So India is such a big country, right? Like it takes up a huge geographical area, and each state in India can be so different. It can be almost like going to a different country. So like northern India is very, very different from southern India, and it's very different from like western India. Like there's just so much, like there's so much variation there. And you're just in a part of the world where, you know, in North America, we're almost sort of isolated between like, we have North America and we have South America, but really to get anywhere else, you have to cross a big ass ocean, right? So it's like you're in this place where it's a lot easier to kind of hop around. And there were a lot of exchange students there. There were students from all sorts of different places in Africa. There were students from, you know, Japan. There were people from everywhere. And it was so beautiful to me. And I come from such a place where everyone's kind of the same, you know, like when I went to school where I grew up, I would say 98% of the kids in my class were white kids, you know, that also lived in the sticks, and like, you know, like these country little white kids, right?
Everyone sounds the same.
And I just love people so much, and I have always just been drawn to people who are different than me. That was the first time I was ever like, I was the one that was really different. Like I would walk down the street and people paid attention to me, because here, like realistically, I'm very girl next door. Like I don't like go around town and people are like, oh, they're just like drawn to me, right? Like I'm a pretty average person, right?
And I think I would definitely give you more credit than to say that you're just an average person. But I think you are an introvert, and to me, I could see it very well being, okay, you're in a situation now where you can't really be an introvert because, you know, you don't look like everybody else. Yeah. I mean, I'm sure, you know, depending on where you are, you obviously like stick out a little bit.
Like a sore thumb.
So it's very hard to be like,
you can look at me and tell, like, I'm extremely fair complected, right? And I was in southern India. So it was central southern India. I was in Bangalore was where I was living and going to school. And southern India, I really stick out, right? Because the people there, especially people who are indigenous to that area, have a darker skin tone even than like people in northern India and things like that, which is really common in a lot of places based on like the geography and the blending of cultures and different things. So yeah, I walk down the street and I draw a lot of attention. So it was also the first time in my life that I had ever been like really different and really like, I loved that. There was nothing I loved more than being somewhere where everything was different. And I think that was so amazing. And I loved meeting people and hearing their stories and figuring out what life was like for them growing up. Like I very easily could have been an anthropologist, right? Because I love culture and I love the spiritual aspect was so important to me as well. I think that, you know, I grew up going to church with my grandmother as a kid, but I outgrew that at a certain point, right? And I was like, this doesn't fit me. This doesn't fit my view of how I see the world, right? And so also that just like looking for something, because I'm a very spiritual person. I think that's a very integral part of who I am. And so being really connected, like India is like like the spiritual cradle of the world, you know, like so many of the major world religions originate in India, right?
God for everything. Don't they have like
Hinduism is It's so fascinating. It's so full of lore. I really enjoyed the courses that I was taking. It was a lot of like cultural courses. And so learning a lot about Hinduism and learning about other religions that I knew absolutely nothing about, learning about Jainism, learning the origins of Buddhism, which I think, realistically, I was always very drawn to. Buddhism comes from Hinduism. It's, it branched out of Hinduism at a certain point in history. And so just being in this place where, we live in such like a secular culture here, like even in the South, in the Bible Belt, like I live a pretty secular life here. If I don't want to engage in that, it's not a part of my daily life. But being there, it's like that's such a integral piece of who everyone is, regardless of like what it is that you believe, because there are people who practice different, faiths and things like that. I was surprised by the amount of Catholicism that I saw in that particular area in India as well. And so I think just being in this place where everyone like has the freedom to like, they're connected to something. It's a really interwoven piece of like everyday life. And I loved that. And to me, there's nothing that makes me feel more connected spiritually than being in a new place and like adventuring and learning and just like constantly being in awe. Like that's my real sense of connection. Like just being so enamored by the world, like makes me feel that like spiritual connection, and being in this place that's already incredibly spiritual was just beautiful. I mean, I saw so many, like sunrise over the Ganges River, and I was in these sacred ceremonies and going to these temples and doing these just absolutely mind-boggling things. You know?
I can imagine too. It's got to be pretty intense. Because I mean, I've lived in Michigan. I've lived in Tennessee when I was, in bands when I was younger. I mean, we've I've been to Indiana. I've been to Illinois.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But, nothing like, I've been to Canada. I've been to Mexico. A lot of cool places, right?
Yeah.
But I can imagine going to India and seeing that culture, going to those temples, seeing something like a sunset on the river there can just be such a sign of things just being so much bigger than what you thought, or how you normally. I think it would definitely shift perspective as far as like, hey, at least for someone like me, because I get very wrapped up into like, this is my house, this is my family, this is like all I need, and then you see something, you're like, oh, there's and
it just expands everything. Like there's nothing in the world that feels better to me, because you can get so caught up in your own head, and I'd been stuck in that space for so long that to feel small and almost insignificant was exactly what I craved and what I needed, and that brought me so much relief to get outside of myself and like be a part of something else, and I saw these things that I could have never even dreamed of seeing. I sat under the fucking tree of enlightenment. Like we went to Bodh Gaya where the Buddha attained enlightenment, and there are these monks who are, praying, and like those are just things that you never like think that you can experience. And so being there is like every second is sacred.
Like I can go just sit at this tree and
it didn't even matter what I was doing. It felt like everything that I was doing was almost this like form of worship, because this is how I connect to something bigger than myself. This is how I get outside of myself, is I put myself in these situations where I have to learn and I have to observe and I have to like adapt and think on my feet and problem solve, and like I live for that, So it was, man, how do you compare like regular everyday life? And so I think that like it awakened a part of me that I had always known was in there, but I had never had the opportunity to really explore. And on top of that, it was like I was in a place where I really needed connection with other people. I'd isolated myself, and I needed that connection, and I made lifelong friends in my program that I was with. One of the people I met there is going to be in our wedding,
awesome.
And that's been years ago now. So,
and it's crazy too to think that, because it kind of seems like it would be very easy to isolate yourself in that situation.
Oh yeah.
If you didn't lean into it, because it's very easy to be like, well, I'm alone here. I definitely don't look like everybody else. I stick out a little bit, so like I'm going to kind of keep to myself. And I think it would probably be very easy to kind of retreat a little bit and be like, I'm gonna do my 4 months and I'm gonna get out of here.
Yeah.
So I think it's really cool that you took the advantage of the opportunity to, connect with people and to experience that, because like I swear to God, sometimes I've been on vacation and you see people that are like, you're at the pool and they're just sitting, like you come down to the pool and they're at the pool the same. It's like, dude, there's like,
there's so much like cool stuff going on here.
Like it's cool to come swim at the pool, but like there's a whole lot of other stuff that you could be doing while you're on vacation. And this is like the one thing that they isolate themselves to. So I think that's, I definitely, the next time we travel, I think I'm going to try to have that mindset a little bit because I'm very much a homebody. Mm-hmm. So I need to like kind of push myself to get out a little bit.
There's a whole big wide world out there, you know?
Well, like we went to...
it's like the world is literally your oyster, just like waiting to be discovered.
Well, we went to Rock Island with Bob and our friends Matt, who's been on the show, with his wife Rain. And we went hiking and I was like, oh man, like hiking, like I like Rock Island.
And like doing like
exercise.
It's intense though. Those people like to hike. When they say go on a hike, like if I go on vacation with Bob, like we like to go places where we can be out in nature. Like that's kind of our thing.
Do the Appalachian Trail.
Yeah,
so,
I'm like
he's definitely a hiker.
Dude. I'm into hiking, but like I'm not gonna hike like 10 miles today. I'm just not doing it. Like I'm trying to chill. I'm trying to, like.
Well, I
imagine this intense.
Rock Island has the sand beach, so you can like go hiking or you can like go to the beach. So I knew after hiking, beach, and I was like, I'm cool with that. And I was there. I was like, man, this is gonna be so rough. And then turns out I was in front of everyone the whole time, chain smoking cigarettes. It's just like, come on, guys, let's go. Like, I guess I really wanted to get to that beach like real quick, but I surprised myself. I was like, I'm gonna be like the slow man because it's at least for me. I have that like I think I'll always have kind of like that fat kid mentality where I'm just like I'm gonna be the last one in line. I'm going to be slowing everybody up. They're going to be like, come on, we'll wait for you.
Come on, John.
And I was just so proud of myself because I was just like, if you lose me, just look for the smoke.
Yeah.
So talk to me a little bit about, coming home and then how did you end up getting into, I guess I'll just say Journey Pure, but how did you end up getting to Journey Pure and finding your place working with people with substance abuse?
Yeah, so I actually started there before I went to India. Oh, okay. So I was at MTSU, I was studying sociology. I was in one of my senior capstone courses. I think I may have actually I took that early, like my junior year, so several semesters before it would have been really time for me to take that, but I was in my capstone course and we had to do a research project. And what I wanted to do, I was, at that point, I still needed a lot of answers. I still, I needed to make sense of my experience and what I had been through and what I was still like experiencing. And so, I found the website for Journey Pure and I was very intrigued by their model, which was much more of a holistic approach. Realistically, in this area, it's hard to find substance abuse treatment that doesn't have that faith-based component. So I was drawn in by that and I decided to go do a case study there. And so I called them and I was like, hey, this is what I'm doing. I'm a student at MTSU. Here's what I'm interested in. Could I come in and just like interview some people? So they set up some interviews for me with a case manager, with a recovery coach, which is like a tech, with just like 4 different people, I think. The residential manager, because it's a residential facility. And so I went in and I did these interviews with these people and I came like armed with all these questions and I was just very like intrigued. I want to know like, what do you do here? How does it work? And the lady who was a case manager there, her name was Susie, and she was just like, are you? And at that point I had quit my retail job. I'd been out of my retail job for a while. And it's like, hey, my funds are really like dwindling here. Like I made $7 and some change an hour, and I have this apartment, I have all this stuff. So that was a whole nother thing. But she was like, are you looking for a job? And I was like, me? Like looking for a job, like, and my thought was like, well, I'm not qualified to like work here. I don't have any idea like how to help these people, but they ended up offering me the job. And I said, yeah, I mean, absolutely. I'll take it. I don't know that I'm qualified or prepared for this, but here's an opportunity. I desperately need a job at this point. Yeah, absolutely. I think you people are, like, I really liked everyone that I talked to. And I was like, I'm really inspired by the mission. Like, yeah, like bring me on board. I'm cool with that. And so I was getting ready to go to India at that time, and I let them know, like, hey, yeah, I'm interested. I want this job. I'll go through the whole process, but like, I've already committed to this program and I'm going to be out of the country for 4 months. So I started training, doing some of that. And then I was gone for the 4 months that I was in India. And then I came back. And I think that I bonded with the people there pretty instantly. The people that I worked with, there was a lady there specifically who I still love very dearly. I refer to her as my mama bear, who she reminded me a lot of my mom. And at that point in time, when I had gotten that job, my mom was, she was in jail actually. And she wasn't there for a super long time, but she was in jail. And, when she got out, was able to say like, hey, I got this job at a substance abuse treatment center. And I remember telling her that, and just like, she just cried, you know? And that was a turning point for my mom in getting clean as well. So she's been clean pretty much ever since then. But she got into a program, and she was working a program through like the recovery court, which I have only good things to say about the program. I got to be a part of that with her, and it saved her life at the end of the day. I'm eternally grateful to those people, and so is she, and so is the rest of my family, right? But I at that point in time, like, the stars just sort of aligned, and I felt like I got to walk the early parts of my mom's recovery with her, with an inside knowledge, and being able to like integrate that in the way that I approach people. And I was a little bit different because I was one of the only people that worked there that wasn't in recovery myself. And sometimes that was to my detriment with patients. I didn't have that credibility with them of having lived that experience. But also, I think that it was a really interesting and unique perspective that I got to bring to them, because a lot of the women, especially early on, they seem to be a little bit older, and a lot of them have had children. And of course, that's like one of the main concerns that they have is like their relationship with their children, and restoring that, and like, what are my kids going to think? Or like, what kind of damage am I doing? Blah, blah, blah. And so having someone there who would say like, well, let me tell you, as a child of someone who was in active addiction and is now trying to navigate recovery, let me tell you what that's like. Let me tell you my experience. Let me tell you what I know. And being able to share that was just, that was the hardest job I've ever worked. But I needed it then. And I think it just aligned with my journey so well. And I got a lot of healing, and I think I helped a lot of people along their journey as well, and I just I still think about some of those patients, and now that I've been gone for a while, some of them have connected with me on Facebook and different things like that. And so to see people who also who got it, because realistically, I went last year, I think, to 3 different funerals, for people my age who overdose, right? So it's like the reality of the number of people who don't get it in time it's staggering, and it's heartbreaking. And so to be in touch with those people that even if everything's not perfect or the journey has had bumps for them since then, to know that recovery is possible, and people did, find healing, and they made progress, and they're at a different place in their life now. It's the most rewarding thing I've ever done, but also it was extremely emotionally draining, especially when it's that personal for you, Yeah,
well, and it's got to be, I mean, especially when you're talking about the older women, because, I know it's got to be, it's definitely got to be valuable to have that perspective of this is what it was like growing up. This is what it was like going through that. But then as you were saying that, what I was also thinking was, hey, this is how that relationship can be mended.
Absolutely.
Listen, I'm living proof that, I'm working with my mom on this right now. This is possible, and things are getting better, and you can restore it. I mean, I'm sure that
it's hope. I mean, it's all about hope, because it and a lot of people, when they come into treatment, that's the most, they've hit a bottom. That's the most hopeless point in their journey up until that point. And sometimes it's not the first time they've been to treatment. And so being back there, that's just an added layer. And being able to just, any nugget of hope that I could give is enough to keep someone there another day. Yeah. And tomorrow might be the day that they hear something that they needed, that makes it click, that makes the difference. It's the message that they came there for, So it's even the smallest things, like, and in something like that, you really have to celebrate the small victories, because we got phone calls from patients' families to say like, hey, thank you for everything that you did, but unfortunately it wasn't enough, and we lost them. And that happened more than once in the time that I was there. And so to see people who make it, and to see people who, because it's not easy. Like if it were easy, then why would people stay in active addiction? Know, like it's the hardest thing.
If it were easy,
that those people will ever do. Yeah. I mean, it's the journey of a lifetime, and it is for a lifetime. It's not something that's like, oh, all of a sudden I'm healed. It's like, again, the context is so important. Like, where do you come from? What's your story? Yep. And like being able to be in that space where you help women just like claim their story and start to live their life, not just in spite of that, but with that story, and letting that be the foundation of this is who I am, but it doesn't define me,
that's gotta, I mean, it's because I don't think a lot of people, if you're outside of that industry, and obviously I don't work in that industry, but with being married to Kara and knowing the people that I know and having friends who've gone through it, I don't think people realize that sometimes it takes somebody going to get treatment for the 8th time for it to click. You know what I mean? So it's always it can definitely feel sometimes like it's that race against the clock, where it's like,
for some people it is.
Are you going to get it in time, before it gets you, kind of thing. Yeah. That's awesome. And again, that was a big reason that I wanted to have you come in, is just, kind of talking about, one thing I really admire about you is that talking to you, even through difficulties and things like that you may have had, you are able to not only say like, how am I going to find the positive, but you also took the opportunity to say, how am I going to find the positive, and how am I going to leave an impact on other people? Yeah. And I think you're still doing that. Because let me ask you this, like, because now, I know that you're kind of contracting and out on your own, but, now you're doing a lot of yoga instruction, things like that. How did that come about? Because I feel like that's still giving you the opportunity to help people.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just in a
different way. Yeah. So, I found meditation before I found yoga. And this was, while I was, still in that high school relationship. And, my mom, because there was a period of time where I just didn't see my mom very much, and never knowing. And like, there's just, again, like all those things going on. And so I found meditation, and it was a different way to kind of escape for a little while. And it wasn't so much escaping as being able to sit and like feel some peace, and not have my mind racing, and not have, XYZ, all these things like in and out and in and out and in, because there's so much internal chatter at that point. Like your mind's so busy, it never rests. And like, that's what having anxiety is like, so I found meditation, and I fell in love with that. And then I think that, I've always had a hard time like with doing that consistently. And I think that's just part of the journey. That's part of being human. Right. But I think I found yoga after that. It was after, I really got into yoga when I was living by myself in the apartment. And, I went through some different things and periods of like struggling with food and struggling with exercise and different things like that. And so for me, yoga was a way to blend taking care of my body with taking care of my mind. And there was so much good stuff for me to read. And there was so much just that like spoke to me spiritually that really drew me to that. And I think I found it at a point where I really needed it. And I fell in love with yoga. And yoga was something that we had at the treatment center as well. So we would have our patients come in and do yoga. And I got to, be with some different instructors there. I got to experience Kundalini yoga for the first time, which is, in my opinion, one of the most spiritual forms of yoga. And I would have these yoga sessions where I would be off the clock, but I would stay and practice because I was working overnight. I was working thirds then. So I would stay in the morning and practice yoga with my patients. And it was at the time when they had Kundalini yoga. And, Kundalini is hard. You go through these kriyas, and there's a lot of like really intense and sort of advanced breath practices, and there's a lot going on. And then obviously you end a yoga class in Shavasana, which is like your meditation time, right? And I would go into this meditation and, she would be talking, and there was this song that we would always sing at the end of class called Long Time Sun. And
I thought you were going to say like All Star by Smash.
No, it wasn't quite the vibe. But I would just like break down at the end of these yoga classes, and it felt so cathartic for me. And it's like I didn't know where it was coming from. It was just like this release of just like all this stuff. And afterwards I would feel like, oh my God, like I just felt like I just like got cracked like an egg, and just like out spills all this stuff, but I feel so good. And I saw that happening for other people. And so I was like, there's something to this. And so I got to study some yoga when I was in India. I did take a yoga course there. And I got to study yoga with a yogi, right? And learn a lot from her about what's really important in a yoga practice. And it's not about what your body looks like. It's about your intention in each pose. It's about where your mind is at. It's about, there's so much internal practice that's happening even in the craziest of asanas or poses, right? And so I just felt like it was this really transformative power. And there's so much, it's just such an ancient practice. And to me, it just felt so sacred, but it also felt so relevant and so like present day. And it was just this really interesting blend for me. And so I fell in love with yoga. I practiced yoga pretty consistently. I had some friends who are yogis, that's what we did, like we went to yoga classes and we went hiking and did yoga. And we, it was just like, that was the thing that just like kind of kept me active and kept me in a really healthy place with my body. And so I knew I wanted to do a teacher training. And so I wanted to, I had one semester left when I came back from India. So I was like, okay, I'm going to finish up this semester and then I'm going to go back to India and I'm going to do a teacher training so that I can get certified to be a teacher. And I wasn't able to swing it, like there was just a lot of other stuff happening and I wasn't able to do it. And so I actually didn't get certified until a couple years ago, I think 2 years ago maybe. And so it was just a lot of personal practice until then. I had taught some here and there, like at the treatment center, filling in for the teacher when she wasn't there. But then I was actually able to do the teacher training and I developed a new layer to my practice. I learned a lot. It was called White Crow Yoga, and it was in Madison, and that's just north of Nashville for those who aren't familiar with Madison.
Like Wisconsin?
Yeah, right. Like Madison, just north of Nashville. So I was driving there on the weekends. I was still working, and I was doing these like 16 to 20 hour weekend intensive training courses. And loving it. I was so exhausted, but I never felt more connected with my practice. And so I started teaching here and there after that, a little bit more at the treatment center, that kind of stuff. And I think it was really when I started my job that I'm at now. They have a wellness studio. And so I was able to start teaching some there and really enjoying it. So now I do some private lessons where the lineage that I'm trained in is called Vini Yoga. And so it's about personalizing yoga to, it works really well for individual kind of yoga one-on-one sessions. It's about, making it accessible and individualizing the practice while still keeping those core principles and, keeping alignment and safety and those kind of biological things in mind as well. And so I really enjoy doing the private yoga sessions because we can kind of dig in, and I do a lot of like getting to know people and what's going on in your life. And, I start all these sessions with, let's do a check-in, like this is something I learned at the treatment center. It's called a PIMS check-in. So like physically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually, like how are you feeling? What's going on? What do you need from this session? And really being able to tailor that is like, I feel like I'm giving the best of what I have to give people when I'm teaching yoga. So
that's awesome.
I'm loving it.
Kind of listening as we've been talking, again, what I've heard a lot of is taking the experiences that you've been through and then using them to not only better your own situation, but eventually, get to that point where you're bettering others, whether it's again through your substance abuse work or helping your mom get through hers or moving into yoga, because again I've been telling myself, because I know Kara's gone to a class of yours and she really enjoyed it. I have a hard time because again I think it's that fat kid mentality. Like I just imagine myself being like being a downward dog and it does not look good. So that's where my kind of anxiety or fear of like trying those things come from.
I think most people probably feel that way, especially if you've never like been to a yoga class, you know?
But I do think, again, that's just one of my favorite things about you is that like I've never been around you and you've just been like, you know what, this sucks. You know what I mean? Like you are always someone who is, you know what, this might suck, but this is what the benefit's going to be. And this is how I'm going to come out okay on this end. And I really do think like your personality, your perspective, and the things that you've been through have really made you a truly wonderful person.
Thank you. I appreciate
well,
that.
I mean it wholeheartedly. Like I am very lucky to be able to call you a friend and to have someone like you in my life and to be able to share that friendship with you know, us and Kara. And I wanted to let you know I really do appreciate you coming in. I know that we've been talking for a while. And I thank you for
it's gone by so fast. It's like one of those things you just get lost in it, you know.
Well, and I have other things I want to ask you right now if you would be willing to come back.
Please, yeah. I feel like I have so many other like fun stories, like because you know, traveling, like I love to be able to talk about that. And like there's so many fun stories. Like there was all kinds of countries we didn't even get to. So I'd love to come back. Yeah.
I would definitely love. I think we could do easily like another 2 hours and there's some more things I want to talk to you about. But I really wanted to kind of focus this as we kind of got through the episode. I kind of wanted to focus on like you and your journey. Cause again, I think that somewhere there's going to be somebody listening who, you know, maybe they have a loved one that's going through the same thing or, you know, maybe they're in that relationship that just ended and they're feeling disconnected and like they don't have anybody. So, you know, hopefully this lands and resonates with them. And I just, like I said, I just want to say thank you. I really do appreciate you coming in. It was absolutely awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think like, I want to thank you. I think that's a very genuine compliment and those are the best ones to get. Right. And I think that like, that's kind of what my purpose is and like being able to take those experiences and like my own introspection and be able to offer the gifts of my experience because what else are they good for other than to like shine a light on people, right? And I think that like there is so much of that. You know, I'm in such a different place now than I was through any of the things that we talked about, right? And just like having that
crazy different place from like when I met you.
Yeah. So having that, like being able to say like there's light at the end of the tunnel. The sun will always rise again tomorrow. And the only thing that we know for sure is that everything changes, right? And so it's like the thing that I've learned and the thing that really is the takeaway for me is that like just if you can hang on, like there's always like the other side that you're going to get to. And then there's the other side of that. And then there's like, it just never ends. Right. And so just being able to hang on and make those connections and do good along the way. And I mean, that's just kind of the whole thing for me, you know?
And I mean, I'm right there with you. I've got a family member who will tell you that I probably told them this a million times. But I'm definitely a firm believer that the world does not care about your feelings. The world doesn't matter if you feel depressed, if you feel sad, if you are, you know, struggling with something, the sun is going to go down, the sun is going to come up, the day is going to change. The only person that can care about you really is you. You know what I mean? Like you can have friends, but when it comes down to how are you going to face the day? How are you going to tackle obstacles? How are you going to be resilient? Right? That's you. And I think your story really echoes a lot of that as far as hey, like this is what's happening, but there's a morning coming and there's a whole day and then a whole nother day after that.
Yeah, absolutely.
I did want to ask you real quick if there was anything that you wanted to, I mean, if there's a way that people can reach you, if they're in the Nashville area, they're interested in doing lessons. Is there any, you know, any places that you like working with that you'd like to, you know, So I still teach yoga at the place that I work, and that's where I do some individual sessions and stuff too. And that's called Body and Mind Consulting. The website is Body Mind TN. And then I also teach yoga at a studio that just opened in Murfreesboro. It's called Royal Massage and Yoga Lounge. And so it's over on Thompson Lane in that area. So kind of a cool area in Murfreesboro. And you can Google them, Royal Massage Yoga Lounge, and it'll pull us up. And I teach there once a week. And then people can always reach me via email for yoga stuff. It's Emily.TheYogini at Gmail. And I love doing the individual work. And so that's something that I'm always really open to, and not just yoga. I like to do like individual like
meditations, and I love to customize it to people and kind of where they are and what their path is. I have people from all different sort of like backgrounds and stuff that I work with, and different faiths and different things. So I really like that challenge of like,
that's awesome.
Here's the wisdom of yoga, what I know of it, right? Because I don't claim to know it all. I'm not a Buddha, right? So there's a lot to learn. But yeah, you guys can reach me at any of those places. And I guess we can leave some of that information in the
I'll put it in the
box.
show notes.
Yeah,
you guys can check it out. We'll put the email up, any of the websites as well. But I just want to say thank you again so much. I really do appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. It was so much fun. First thing I was like, I have to be on John's podcast. Like, I was so stoked for you.
Well, I'm very happy. I'm very happy that you're able to come. And, and again, just thank you so much. We will definitely come back. I've got a whole other wide array of just kind of random stuff that I want to talk about, but I really wanted people to get the opportunity to know you and hear your story. And we will, I'm told right when we're done, we'll put it on the books and see when we can get you back.
Perfect.
All righty. Awesome. Well, thank you so much.
Yeah.
See everybody. Thank you for checking out.
Bye.